everybody. Coming to you ahead of the second half of season 4 here, just to give you a little heads up, and I guess maybe a little bit of an apology before you put your ears on this one. We are about to have a legendary conversation, and 2/3 of the conversation, meaning 2 of the 3 people involved, are going to sound fantastic, but one of us is going to sound like their microphone.
And it's not me.
Yeah, got dropped into a garbage can. So we want to give you a heads up that my microphone is doing something weird for a couple episodes at the beginning of the second half here. So just a heads up and a quick apology. It's not totally terrible, but if you're wondering what happened, we don't know, and we're on it. But the important parts are the guest audio is great, and my co-host audio is great. I know a lot of you come here for the gravitas of Maddie B and for our litany of amazing guests that we have here on the show. So nothing really out of line for you there. But just for those of you who are audiophiles who can pick up on the stuff here, yes, there's something super weird going on, and we're not really sure at the moment of this release. So we just wanted to give you a heads up that we're working on it, and we hope to get it resolved shortly. So enjoy this one, though. This is a banger. This is a legendary guest that we have. It's a big fish for us. Matt, are you 0 to 10? 10 being we landed on the moon, like that kind of excited, or 0 like I could do without it. Where are you on this one?
Oh, I'm definitely in
Are we on the moon?
We are on the moon, definitely.
All right, well,
we are podcasters on the moon.
Well, we hope you enjoy this episode of the History Things podcast.
The History Things podcast is brought to you by HistoryNet, publisher of 9 different historical magazines, including the Civil War Times, American History, and Military History. Visit HistoryNet.com to learn more, or follow them on social media by searching for @history_net. Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoy the show.
Are you ready?
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the second half of season 4. I am so excited. We're kicking things off with the heavyweight fight, but before we get into it, I gotta introduce my main man, my main squeeze here at the History Things podcast. No, you're definitely my main squeeze, bro, at this point. Guys, ladies and gentlemen, you know this man. I don't even know that I should even introduce him anymore. He's a legend that you know before we even drop his name. Author, historian, park ranger, my guy here across from me at the War Department, Matty B, Matt Borders. How are you, bud? How's the summer going?
Summer is biting back, that's for sure.
Hot.
It is hot. And it is busy. Both of our sites have been inundated this summer, as you are aware, my friend.
I was getting ready to say, yeah, this summer seems weirdly busier than normal. I don't know why. I'm not really asking why, but I definitely just am observing it. I'm also observing all of you out there this July 1st who have decided to make the air smell a little different here in Maryland. Matt and I both as rangers at state and federal parks. Again, not named for some of us here on the show. But, we definitely, we see you out there. Make sure you pack it out. Remember, pack it out. If you bring it into the parks, pack it out. We're not going to get into the rest of that conversation. I don't want to find all your fun stuff after you leave. One, you should share, and I don't want to miss the party. And 2, it's kind of lame to come to somebody's house and leave all the trash. But welcome to the game, I guess, Maryland. But it's definitely been making the summer interesting because I think between natural, just the people around and the weather, and now we have all the nature walk stoners out there visiting us. I mean, we're just busy right now. So
definitely that. But remember, it is still illegal on federal property.
That's right. So at certain people's sites, you got to be extra careful. In fact, don't do it. In fact, on certain other people's sites, just don't do it. Just makes my life easier too. But you know what? Whatever. We're not here for any of that today. What we are here for, though, is a conversation that we...
Yeah, you called me a legend, sir, but I tell you what, that is far, far inappropriate because we have a true legend in the studio.
Yeah, to have a conversation about a subject that we have been, avoiding, not like avoiding it like we're scared of it, but it's like, how do we talk about this subject, right? We have friends who have podcasts that focus on this subject.
Just on this subject.
Just on this subject. We have a number of other friends who have worked as rangers here, are authors on subjects, are authors of various literary and scholarly works about this subject. And it's like, how do we tell this story? We're not rangers at this site. We're not known for this as our bailiwick, to put it the way my Michigander friend here does. We're Antietam guys. When we talk about the Civil War, we make no bones about that. We're First World War guys, if you have to get us outside of the Civil War box. Fair to say, Matt?
I would say that's fair.
So when we come to this big-ass subject on its 160th year of observation commemoration, I would say in this circumstance you could say celebration, because I think the battlefield was designed for that purpose, as we learned throughout the course of these 2 episodes you're going to get. But let's stop beating around the bush, you know? First, let's talk about what we're here for, Matt, and then let's get to who's with us today. So first, Matt, we are deciding to take things later into the war than 1862 and earlier than 1864. I was about to say, we usually live in 62, but you work in 64. But
that's true.
We're going to spend a little bit of time in the summer of 1863. Where are we going, Matty V?
We're going smack dab in the middle of the war, Pat, and we're actually going up a little north of here, up into Pennsylvania. That's right, folks. It is the second Confederate incursion into the North, better known to history as the Gettysburg Campaign. And we're going to be doing a lot of coverage of the campaign for the 160th commemoration of July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, and beyond.
That's right. We are finally getting into this. As I said, we asked how would we do this, and we figured out the way we would do this is we would cover it in multiple ways. We're going to get involved in a moment with you all in a legendary conversation. We're going to have some of our friends support that legendary conversation with chats of their own here in the War Department. We're going to use this summer's From the Field experience to take you to Gettysburg National Military Park, to the site of the battle in 1863, and we're going to catch up with some of these little stories in a sea of majorly epic stories. But before we get to that, before we get to the field later this summer, before we get to our friends supporting the big narrative of Gettysburg, and honestly, before you guys tune out of this episode and into our Vicksburg stuff, because guess what? We're talking about both Bergs in 1863.
There's more to 1863 than just Gettysburg.
That's right. So before we get to all that, though, we are going to talk about what we're here for, and that is July 1863, north of the Mason-Dixon line, Adams County, Pennsylvania. We're talking the Battle of Gettysburg. And Matt, to do this today, who is sitting with us in the War Department?
Well, Pat, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce to you and to our listeners Scott Hartwig, the former chief historian of Gettysburg National Military Park.
Obviously, big ties to Gettysburg, long ties to Gettysburg, but for those of you who may not know, more recently, you've been diving into the Maryland campaign. And I heard a rumor from Tom Clemens that this is actually your preferred or favorite campaign.
Well, I don't know that I have a favorite campaign.
Ah, okay.
We do. When I started on it, it was because, and this was a long time ago when I started on it, it was because the only books that existed on Antietam was James Murfin,
right,
and Francis Palfrey, who was in the battle.
Right.
That was it. I mean, they also had Stackpole's From Cedar Mountain to Antietam, which was not a great book. But there were no other books on Antietam, and it was a very lightly covered campaign. And I naively said many, many years ago, I'm going to write about Antietam. And, that started me down the path.
Well, that's how I got introduced to you as a historian. Matt said right away, and I wanted to tease you about it, you left out a huge part of the story for me. Obviously with Gettysburg being such a huge part of your career, the first time I ever was introduced to you was in the Antietam video. And you're like walking down that lane with Tom Clements, who has no beard at that time. But I was like, and I thought 2 things. I was like, wow, this is an awesome story. And I liked your jacket a lot that you were wearing. And I was I want one of those jackets. So I obviously want to talk a little bit about your work, but you're retired now. How's that going?
Fantastic.
Enjoying it?
I'll tell you what, I'm like a light switch. Is when I was at the park working for Gettysburg National Military Park, the switch was on. I gave them everything I had. I loved my job. When I walked out of there, I turned the switch off, and I was a happy clam. I
Wow.
run into people all the time. They're like, they thought I was lost. I didn't know what I'd do with my life, and I was like, I did all the things at Gettysburg I really wanted to do, and I loved it. I
That's
loved
cool.
it. It wasn't my identity. I didn't need to stay there any longer. I'd been there long enough, and I'm like, and I mean, another part of it was most of my really good friends who worked with me, they all died, and you see that, and you're like, something, life is short,
Yeah.
and you can work long enough, but then get out. And I did, and I have not looked back a single day.
Well, congrats to you.
Yeah,
man. I hope
that's
to be able
sage
to
advice,
retire one
too.
day, but I don't think I will. I am what do they call that? A millennial. I will work till I die. No, that's very awesome. So congratulations. But you're not truly retired because you're still working. Obviously you've got was it Volume 2 coming out this summer? Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Talk about your work with the Maryland campaign, or?
Yeah, so I spent about 20 years writing the first volume on the Maryland campaign, to Antietam Creek, which
is amazing.
It takes you from the end of Second Manassas, well, actually the beginning where they were put McClellan back in command of the army, to the night before the Battle of Antietam. And the reason I did that is I like books that have some substance to them. I don't like, I understand the need for broad brush books and things like that, lighter books, because not everybody has time to read a deep book. But I wanted to do something really of substance. I wanted to do a book that told the whole story, not just the general story. I wanted to tell the story of the enlisted people, the civilians in the path, all of it. And I also wanted to cover South Mountain and Harper's Ferry in depth. Nobody covers Harper's Ferry in depth. That's always been overlooked. And that meant you couldn't do the Battle of Antietam. So I decided Antietam would be the second volume. So I finished To Antietam Creek. That was published in 2012. And then I took about a year, take a break.
Just let your brain come back to the zero.
And then I started on, the title of it is I Dread the Thought of the Place, the Battle of Antietam and End of the Maryland Campaign. And that took me about 10 years of writing and researching. I had a lot of the research done already, but you still have to go through and synthesize everything. And give you an example, like when I wrote, let's say one of the chapters on the Sunken Lane, there's 3 on the Sunken Lane battle. I would prepare what I called like Chapter 11 notes, which were the notes to Chapter 11, which was one of the Sunken Lane chapters. And the notes would be all these different quotations from soldiers who were there that I might use part of or wanted to have in one place. And those notes would be over 100 pages.
The project is so much bigger than what we are going to hold in our hands in a few months.
Yeah. But the thing is with that is what you do then. You have this, you're not constantly like, oh, is that on the computer or is that a hard copy or is that in a book? You don't have to look around one place. You have one document. It takes a while to put the document together. Right. So long story short, it takes you 10 years to finish the whole book and get the thing done. It'll be out August 22nd.
Ooh,
oh, I was like, 4 more
fantastic.
days. That's my birthday. Let's go. Obviously, happy birthday, me. Thank you for doing that. Very considerate of you. I have a question for you, just from a writer's perspective. 10 years to put together a writing project. Like I imagine, because in my short time writing, I've been working on a project for about 3 years. Like I'm such a different writer right now than when I started this project. Mm-hmm. And like, how do you fight the urge to not go back to the begin? Like when you're at the 8, 9, and 10 year mark, not to go back to the stuff you're writing in years 1 and 2 and just be like, I got to fix it.
Yeah, no, that's a good point because I think you become a better writer the more you write.
Right.
Definitely.
And your style can also change. The one thing you do in this process to kind of help bring it all together. Well, one of the things I did is every chapter I finished, I'd finish the chapter, I'd let it sit for a few days, then I would read through the entire chapter, like ruthlessly go through it and edit it. Then I sent it to 2 friends of mine, one of whom's really good with grammar, also knows the Civil War well, and the other, there's a fellow who worked at Antietam, an expert on the battle. And I just told him, I said, listen, be merciless, tear this apart. And then they would send the chapters back to me. I would go through all of their notes and corrections and things like that. And then I would come up with a final chapter. So what that started to tend to do is you begin to have a unified voice. Then when your copy editor gets the manuscript, they're going to note if you have a different voice in different places, and they're going to try to fix that for you, or they're going to bring it to your attention. So it's just it's just a process of, you have to be really, really self-critical of what you're doing and not think that it's fantastic and it's great.
Right.
And just really look at it with a critical eye. And over time it'll get better, it'll get much better, and you'll have a unified voice in what you write.
I've been doing this with music lately, as I still pretend to be a musician with my brother. Right? And like every time we record something, I'm like, this is amazing. And then like a week, a day, a month later, I'm like, this is horrible. What was I thinking? Like, this is a trash demo. So I just was wondering, like, a decade's a long time. And there's such an evolution of creative self. I just wondered what that's like. How do you fight that urge? So obviously there's a process in place to kind of keep that condensed. That's pretty neat. Well, let's do this. This subject we're here for today, we have basically avoided for the first 4 seasons of our show, both as a professional courtesy to some friends of ours on the Addressing Gettysburg podcast. They built their entire show around this, and we don't want to step on their toes. Right. No, but what we really wanted to do is, like we do, we wanted to be very careful with how we approach the story and addressing. I'm sorry. See, Matt, now I brought your show up, and now I can't stop saying it. The Battle of Gettysburg and the campaign as a whole has been, it's well-farmed ground. To the point where, like, of recently, I am so overhearing about it because I think I keep getting the same simple stories. And, like, what I'm looking for is some of that magic. And I think what we wanted to do was we wanted to wait until we had the right storyteller. And I'm a big fan of throwing Hail Marys. And Matt told me one day that he was eating lunch with a legend, and I said, ask him if he wants to talk about Gettysburg. So that's
when I ambushed you when we were up with Joe and I.
Thank you very much for coming on our show again. But let's like, if we start the story of Gettysburg, we asked in pre-production because it's so big, like, where would we go to? So let's get right to the stunning federal defeat at Chancellorsville. Right. We've had Jackson's famous flank march, which I really like to give credit to Rhodes to because he does all the real work. But like, we have this demoralized kind of moment for the Federal Army. We have this super momentous moment for the Confederacy. How does the story of the Battle of Gettysburg begin for you here, Scott?
It begins here because Chancellorsville provides the opening for Lee to do what he wants to do, which is to seize the initiative and to mount a major offensive that he hopes can get all the way into the north. Lee is one of the mistakes I think some historians have made over time with Lee, and it's kind of stuck in popular culture, is that Lee was fixated on Virginia. I mean, he only thought about Virginia. He was very parochial in his views and regional in his views. He didn't really think strategically, and I think all of that is hooey. Lee was the best strategist in the Confederacy, but beyond being a good military strategist, he understood the political realities of the war, I think, better than Jefferson Davis did. And what he understood was concentration of force, carrying the war to the enemy, and demoralizing the northern voter. That's how you're going to win the war. You're not going to conquer Northern territory. You're not going to overwhelm the military might of the North. You're going to defeat the Union by demoralizing its voters, who are going to vote the Republicans out, vote the Democrats in, who are going to negotiate. Even at the best, if you got a truce, that's a win for the Confederacy, because they're probably going to win their independence if that happens. So Lee sees this opening to mount an offensive, and he lobbies the Confederate government successfully to mount this offensive. Now, they've got their own problems. We all know that Grant has surrounded Vicksburg. Right. He's got the Confederate Army there bottled up. And the Confederate cabinet is all acting predictably. They're doing what most people are going to do. They're going to be, we need to take people from your army. We need to react to what they're doing. Take people from your army and send them out there and lift the siege. And Lee looks at that and he goes, that's a pipe dream. That's never going to happen.
Right.
That, So what's going to happen at Vicksburg is going to happen at Vicksburg. Let's do something about what we can. Let's seize the initiative ourselves here and not react to what they're doing, make them react to us. And he's ultimately successful in doing that. There's a lot of great correspondence in the official records between Lee and Seddon and Davis and all these different people. Now, a lot of the conversations that took place, we don't know what happened because there was no stenographer when Lee went to Richmond and met. So he makes this decision. Now, he doesn't, of course, look at a map and go, here's where we're going, guys. Lee is an opportunist. So he's always, what I'm seeking is the best opportunity to whip the Union Army. They're my objective. The Union Army is my objective.
So is this a copy and paste of the year before? Like
It's very similar.
We're moving into their turf to
It's very similar.
beat them up on their place?
It's very similar.
On that note, was there any ghosts of the Maryland campaign or that first Confederate incursion that are worrying the Confederate hierarchy?
I never picked that up. There probably was, because there's enormous risk entailed in crossing the Potomac and removing the main Confederate field army from protecting Richmond. And, the Confederates have the same thing that the Union has, which there's always a group of military people and political people who are like, we need to always protect the capital at all costs. So even if that means constantly reacting to what the other guys are doing and losing the war, we need to protect the capital at all costs.
And Davis and Lincoln are very similar in that extent.
Yeah. I think, Lee does duplicate some of what he did in the Maryland campaign. He's just going to cross into Maryland farther west than he did.
Right.
And there's the reason for that is...
Yeah, the first time we crossed here, they hated us.
Well, the thing is that he crossed east of the Blue Ridge the first time because he wanted to draw the Union Army out of Washington.
Right.
The second time, all he needs to do is get the Union Army out of Virginia and get it up into Pennsylvania. And so he has secondary objectives, which many historians have turned into primary objectives, which I don't think they were. One was to feed his army. So the argument that I make when people argue that he went north to feed his army, I'm like, how do you feed his army in the Wilderness Campaign?
Right.
But really? How did he do it? Because if you're saying he couldn't stay in Virginia, he had to go into Pennsylvania to defeat his army.
His supply lines are shot.
Then how did he fight for the entire summer of 1864 in Virginia?
That's a desperate scene. It's over.
It's preposterous. So, yes, Lee always had supply problems. And yes, if he could get into the North, he could seize a lot of supplies. And they did seize a lot of supplies, and they sent a lot of supplies back that eased some of the burden on the Confederate logistics system to keep Lee's army supplied. And also, secondary objective, if you can capture Harrisburg, what a huge political embarrassment to the Lincoln administration, because this is along with New York State, is the strongest state in the Union as far as supplying troops, and Pennsylvania, particularly for political support as well. And if you can capture Harrisburg, again, it's just driving home this idea, you can't whip us. We can march with impunity. So that's a secondary objective, but I would say his primary objective in this movement into the North is to bring the Union Army up and to fight a battle against them and to whip them, because that's how he's going to demoralize the Northern voter.
That's such an interesting, it's the same, but it's not the same. It's like, here, you can copy my homework, but change it a little bit. But I also look at it you want to kind of learn, from the lessons, because he at the end of the Maryland campaign, right, we talked about this a lot, he doesn't initially cross the river with the intention of quitting. He's looking to regroup and come back around and continue the fight. So he feels at that moment that even with that, beat down at Antietam, that he's still close. The initiative is still within grasp. So obviously coming back a year later, he's got to feel like I was this close. So maybe let's
push a little harder.
Yeah, push a little harder here, do a little less. I don't know. It's rare that you see somebody get such a second chance to do something, and he's basically going to do the same thing, just with a different path into the States and things like that. But
well, speaking of the different path into Maryland and then Pennsylvania beyond, he's clearing the valley when he goes up.
Right.
securing his supply lines through the Shenandoah Valley and gathering up stuff as he goes. Is that one of the reasons why he pulls further to the west, is to clear the valley again?
No, it pulls further to the west just because it's a safer route
That makes sense.
for him to move on. He wants to block the mountain passes. He's trying to confuse Hooker as to what
Right.
it is he's doing, and he does that really successfully because Hooker's not sure. Is this a raid? Is this an invasion? Is this a turning movement? What is this? So it kind of fixes Hooker in place. That's what enables Lee to get past Hooker and get into Maryland and then Pennsylvania before the Union Army can get there. So it's the other thing I'd say about Lee and Gettysburg campaign, the Maryland campaign. After Sharpsburg, when the Army goes back into Virginia and Lee's contemplating, I'm thinking about trying to go back in. One of Lee's strengths and one of his weaknesses was he sometimes saw what he wanted to see, and he could push people beyond what they were capable of doing.
I can relate to that.
Right. So it is definitely a weakness of his. So I don't think Lee fully comprehended just how bad a condition his army was in. So the wake-up call that he gets is the Battle of Shepherdstown.
Absolutely.
Right. Absolutely.
Because he realizes at the Battle of Shepherdstown, he literally only had one division in his army that was combat effective to mount that counterattack. That was AP Hill.
He's like,
All
"And
the
you
other-
lost all my guns.
All the other divisions
didn't?
were so battered that they were in no condition. In fact, you read these accounts, nobody knew where anybody was. Everybody was like sleep deprived, exhausted, starving with hunger. And people were trying to find out, where's Jackson? Where's D.H. Hill? Where's so? Nobody knew where anybody
The
was.
commands to stop talking to each other.
Yeah, it was. And that was an eye-opener for Lee. And then you see his correspondence with Jefferson Davis completely changes.
Right.
And he's like, uh-oh, I got a problem. I got massive number of stragglers. My army's worn out. We got to rest. I don't want to fight. And then he withdraws down towards Winchester, and then he starts rebuilding his army. So, he's got an army that's in way better condition that he takes into Pennsylvania in the summer '63. It's well-equipped. It's well-uniformed. He's sorted out a lot of his logistical problems. They were incredibly efficient when they got into Maryland and Pennsylvania with seizing supplies and disseminating the supplies to the troops, and also sending a lot of the supplies back into Virginia to be stockpiled.
They actually come right through, right where the History Things podcast is broadcasting from, New Windsor. It's right down the street. They raided in New Windsor, Rosser raid, I believe, or maybe that's 62. But they're in Westminster, I know, in 63 for sure before the Union Army gets here, raiding the stores there. So I mean, they're all over the place picking up the logistics, the stuff, the fuel of warfare.
Yeah.
Is getting, if we have to bug out part of Lee's plan this time, like knowing that his army, I guess he realized it sort of in a after the fact, things are terrible, in 62, this is not what I thought it was kind of situation. In going again into Maryland and then Pennsylvania and gathering these supplies, is he also still considered of, if I have to bug out, like, is there a better way to leave? Like, I don't know. I've always wondered, like, if Lee's plan is so sound, like, because we hear a lot about the 40-mile wagon train, the Union Army almost gets him, coming out into Frederick and things like that. So, like, I feel like, is there ever the concept of retreat in this plan, moving into it at the beginning? Because see, like, if we ever have to leave, here's the plan.
That's a really good question. I think it depends upon, Lee is constantly monitoring where is the Union Army. Is the Union Army moving parallel with me, or are they attempting to move across my communications? Because if they're going to move on my communications, then I might have to turn back and fight them.
Right.
Or I might have to turn and seize something that is going to really force them to come up here. So another part of going after Harrisburg, I think Lee knows, because of the railroad bridge, because of the political importance of Harrisburg, that is going to bring the Union Army on the east side of the mountain range, South Mountain, and the Blue Ridge. And that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to keep the Union Army on the east side of the Blue Ridge. And because if he's going to fight a battle, it's probably likely he's going to fight it east of the Blue Ridge. He doesn't know where he's going to fight the battle. He's going to fight the battle wherever he thinks he's got an advantage. But yeah, I don't think Lee thinks in terms of, okay, if this thing goes bad, how do I get out of here? He's thinking, this is going to go well. How do I keep them from doing something I don't want them to do?
Okay.
And monitor them constantly and keep my army always in dispositions that I can react and I will have a way out. So if you look at when he moves into Pennsylvania, he doesn't march everybody in there all at once. The army's spread out over a really long space, so that if the Union Army had attempted to move against his communications, he's got an Army Corps that can confront them, and then he can bring his other 2 Army Corps back and then reunite his army and fight a battle in, say, probably Western Maryland.
Right. You said Corps, because that's right. The Confederate Army has grown up at this point. It's evolved into the Corps system. The depot systems back home are starting to crank stuff out. So when you mentioned they're well supplied and stuff like that, this is the biggest, toughest army of Northern Virginia that we might get in the field.
Right.
I mean, they're pretty nasty when they start to get entrenched and stuff around Richmond, but like out in open campaign, I mean, this is fresh and ready to fight.
Yeah.
Your point about keeping an eye on federal forces, though, is a good one, because that's why we see Jeb Stuart and his boys running around and guarding those gaps and really screening the army as they're moving into the Shenandoah and then north through the Shenandoah Valley.
Let's talk about Jeb Stuart at this point. So, like, they've got a good idea of what the federal army is doing, and then suddenly they don't, right? You know, that's how the whole first day kind of happened.
Yeah.
So, where is the departure from the, moment A to moment B? Like, they've crossed. Jeb's got great intelligence, as he mostly does throughout the war, and then suddenly he begins this ride through, like, where I grew up down in Montgomery County. And he showed, I played this game called Where in the World is Jeb Stuart? Because he's in, like, him or elements of his unit are, like, everywhere all at once while the armies are descending upon each other. So where is the departure here?
Well, he does a really good job in the early parts of the campaign when they're still in Virginia in blocking the mountain passes. And that's what leads to all these cavalry battles at Aldie, Middleburg. It's the effort of Pleasanton's Union cavalry to penetrate through the gaps and get prisoners and find out what are they doing. And Stuart successfully blocks that. The Union cavalry fights really well in these engagements, but Stuart wins them in that the Union cavalry doesn't gather any intel about what the Confederates are up to. I think what happens then is that the Confederates are guilty of a bit of hubris here. Stuart's, how many times has Stuart ridden around the Union Army?
At this point, 1 million times.
Twice at least.
1 million times.
Yeah. And I mean, the time he rode around the Union Army after Sharpsburg in October of 62, he doesn't lose a single man. And he rode around an army of over 100,000 men.
Yeah.
So I think those things give you a tremendous amount of confidence that we can do this stuff with impunity. And
that turns into arrogance.
So that give me my best brigades of cavalry. I'm going to leave you some cavalry, which are not the A team. They're the B team, the cavalry that's going to be left with Lee, like Jenkins' brigade.
Right.
So I think sometimes people don't realize, they look at these cavalry brigades and they're like, oh, they're all the same. I mean, there's a whale of a difference between Hampton's brigade and Jenkins' brigade. Jenkins' brigade is fine for guarding wagon trains, guarding prisoners, maybe holding some temporarily defensive position. But as far as gathering intelligence, they're not going to do it for you, probably, because they're not going to go close with the enemy and get prisoners and do that sort of stuff. They're not.
Yeah, Jeb Stuart on this campaign in Rockville, like, abducts a guy, like, right after church, or like tries to, like, or something, like. But there's, like, they're looking to grab people.
But he wants his best trained, best mounted, most aggressive, most experienced cavalry with him, and the idea is, and I think probably how he sells this to Lee is that, look, I mean, these things always disrupt the Union rear, and they react to this. And this is going to help you, as you move the army into Maryland and then into Pennsylvania, be unhindered by them, because they're going to try and come after me and catch me, and they can't catch me. I'll meet up with Ewell in York, Pennsylvania. We'll reunite, bring the whole army together. This will all work out. And Lee's just as guilty of, people
Sounds good.
sometimes people always like, Lee's not guilty, Stewart's completely guilty, or Lee's totally guilty, Stewart's not guilty. I'm like they're both guilty. Stewart loses himself in what is his main mission going into Pennsylvania, which is to screen the army and to get this raid in and to disrupt things, because he thinks it will be bigger than if he just stays and screens the army as he's been doing. And Lee lets him do it because I think Lee is confident that he can, because he's done it before.
Yeah, just
So-
so you're invincible. Go have fun.
It's right. So I think that's what leads to this. And then, Stewart is going to get a lesson in that the Army of the Potomac's cavalry
Has grown up.
has really grown up.
Yeah.
And the organizational changes that Hooker has made in the Army are really making a difference. And they're going to make a difference through the whole battle. The reorganization of the artillery, the reorganization of the cavalry, just the building of morale, like with the Corps badges and that sort of stuff, better food, better logistics, much better intelligence gathering. That's all going to benefit Meade when Meade takes command of the
I
Army.
feel like Hooker gets completely forgotten for all of this because he
He
gets
does.
routed at Chancellorsville and Meade takes over just in time to get the spotlight.
Yeah, and it probably worked out for the best. We'll never know. But you have to wonder if Joe Hooker's confidence has been shaken so much that once he actually gets into combat with Lee, that once again which is really unusual because Hooker never loses confidence except at Chancellorsville.
Right.
But it's a different thing when you're the Army commander.
Yeah, and we addressed that in our Fredericksburg episode. Burnside obviously is very comfortable in a certain world, becomes the Army commander, and it's like, oh man, I am sweaty. Like, this is a whole different world. Matt, you were getting ready to say something.
Well, I'm just glad you're touching on some of the lesser known aspects of rebuilding the Army of the Potomac, because the Bureau of Military Information is huge, plays a huge role in the Gettysburg campaign, and I think it's only been in the past few years we've really started to see that with the biography of George Sharp that came out a few years ago.
Great book.
Yeah, and the work that's being done, and his spies are all over this area. We've got a guy in Frederick who does a ton of work in Frederick for the Bureau of Military Information, and keeping an eye on the Confederate movements is a big part of their job. Now, what's interesting about that is that we've also had these little elements developing within the Confederate Army as well that is going to play havoc with Pleasanton. 43rd Battalion Virginia Cavalry, Mosby's Rangers, they're developed arguably for the purpose of the Gettysburg campaign, to get out there, be a pain, and that's really what Pleasanton's hyper-focusing on when Confederates start moving across the Potomac, because Mosby's burning all of the defenses along the B&O Railroad.
Yeah.
And he's not off chasing Jeb Stuart. He's worried about this battalion. Am I in the right ballpark?
Yeah. I mean, it shows you the outsized influence a small unit can have that is highly disciplined and well led and elusive.
Right.
Yeah.
For both cases, the intelligence branch for the Army of the Potomac and for Mosby there.
I like that we're barely into this and we've already hit our theme of people being people. We've addressed sort of the fact that like guys, like big names, the big sexy names, Lee and Stewart, are kind of eating their own ego right now. Like, you want to just like, go ride off for no reason that far south into Maryland? Go for it. You got a guy. You've never been hit. And then, Jeb's like, yeah, I do. Yeah, I totally got this. And like, there's no real humbleness at this moment. It's like, we're going to win.
Do you think he got close enough to actually see Washington? He claimed it.
I don't know.
Okay.
I
He's
don't
in
know.
Montgomery County. That's possible. I mean,
it's possible.
He
I
could
guess,
show up in
but-
Silver Spring and technically see the outskirts of Washington.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. The thing is, we can criticize Stewart all we want, but if we'd been in Stewart's shoes and had experienced what Stewart had experienced, this is why hubris happens. Is that you've always worked. I had a friend of mine who years ago he was a battalion commander in Vietnam. He did 3 tours in Vietnam, and I remember he told me one time. He said I'll always take trained troops who are trained in the doctrine of the military over veteran troops. I thought, that's interesting. He says, veteran troops will always try what worked before. And he says, the enemy is constantly evolving and changing. They're learning from their mistakes, and they're not going to do what you thought. And you're going to try and do the same thing that worked for you at the battle before that. And he said that's what gets you in trouble. He says, whereas if you follow the doctrine, you're more likely to be successful. I always found that interesting, and I think it's true for Stuart. Certainly, I mean, he's just been so successful up to this point. You know, he had some hard knocks during the Maryland campaign. Some of the Union cavalry was pretty good.
Darn right.
I mean, we like to talk about the Landon House Party fight down in Hyattstown in Urbana, like on September 8th. Like, you know, where, you know, Jeb is having a grand old time, but he still, in effect, his cavalry effectively screens the army. He's like, hey, we're partying, but don't come here. And there's a pretty brisk fight down there in Hyattstown. So. All right, well, I said I wasn't going to do it, and we're not going to do it. So we avoided bashing Jeb Stuart because that is something that is also done extensively when talking about the subject of Gettysburg. But I did kind of want to like get into like where is the departure from being such an effective screen to kind of getting lost, and it just seems to be this moment of humanity. You know, we're here, and the last time I was here, maybe I could have done a little more, so I'm going to do it. And the boss says okay. So. So where do we go from here? We go right into July 1st? You want to get right, or is there still more setup to this, you know, huge story?
Yeah, we definitely need to touch on what's happening in Frederick, at least on June 28th, unless you had some additional points you wanted to touch on.
The period June 28th to June 30th is crucial to understanding the setup to Gettysburg, why the battle takes place, but also kind of how the battle develops the way it does. So June 28th is, of course, the day that Hooker's relieved of command and George Meade is appointed to command of the army. And Meade is he's one of the most misunderstood officers in the Army of the Potomac. He's constantly referred to as a mediocre general, constantly referred to as that. He's not Napoleon Bonaparte, but Meade is a very solid general. He's a good general, and his best 3 days of the war are going to be the 3 days of the Battle of Gettysburg and the days before the Battle of Gettysburg, because he makes all the right moves. He really does, and he's very decisive. You know, in fact, there was a recent book on Gettysburg that just it claimed that Meade, every decision he made was always political, which was completely untrue. I mean, there is no evidence to support that. Meade was a consummate professional. He'd also seen, it's smart to stay out of politics because McClellan really involved himself in politics, and that did not work out well for him. So I'm staying out of politics. I'm apolitical on this thing. He was conservative in his views, but he didn't let that affect how he implemented military strategy to achieve the political goals of the Lincoln administration. I mean, he attempted to do that.
There's a reason he has the job for the rest of the war.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a reason he gets the job and keeps it.
Yeah, and he's highly respected by all the other corps commanders in the Army. And I think, you guys were talking about Burnside at Fredericksburg. One of the big things that hurt Burnside is that, he wasn't disliked by the high command when he takes command of the Army. Everybody liked Burnside. He wasn't McClellan, and so they were suspicious of him immediately. They didn't give him their full support. At Gettysburg, Meade's got the full support of the rest of the Army. Nobody else wants the job, for one thing. They're like, hey, glad he got it.
Congratulations, man.
But they all respect him, except for Sickles, who's a special case, and Sickles is a Hooker man. He's a hooker. He owes his position.
Sickles is a hooker man.
Well, he owes his position to Hooker. So, and he's the one guy. He's one of a couple of guys who supported Hooker when Hooker wanted to withdraw back across the Rappahannock and the Rapidan, and that's where kind of Meade and Hooker's relationship starts to go south. But so Meade takes command of the Army, and he immediately issues orders for the Army to continue its advance. He gets a briefing from Hooker, understands where everybody is. His plan is really good based on the intelligence that he has, because he's got large Confederate forces in York, near Harrisburg, near Chambersburg. He doesn't know which one is the main body of the Army, so he has to keep his army on a broad front So he's going to spread his army across the broad front. He makes really effective use of his cavalry to screen his advance into Pennsylvania, to cover his flanks. And then one of the other things he does is on the eve of the battle, and of course he doesn't know a battle's going to occur, but on June 30th, he creates a left wing of the army. And he groups these 3 corps, the 1st Corps, the 11th Corps, and the 3rd Corps, under the command of Major General John Reynolds, who had been Meade's boss about a year before, and now Meade is in command of Reynolds.
I'm going to do it. So we are big fans of George Meade. And at Fredericksburg, I usually take this opportunity to take a shot at John Fulton Reynolds because of, obviously, to me, I think John Reynolds suffers a little bit of the Jimi Hendrix complex. You know what I mean? Like, he didn't get old to,
Right.
burn out or do something, but, like, I think he did, at Fredericksburg. Well, Meade is, smashing through Jackson's lines. We begin the game of where in the world is John Reynolds?
Yeah.
Right.
And the support that could exploit this and potentially have changed that huge moment. So we are huge Meade guys. So loving this flipping of the tables, and now Meade is the boss. So big fans of that.
Yeah, I mean, and Reynolds, Reynolds is a good case in point in that you can have bad days.
Yes.
You can have bad days, and Reynolds had.
That was a spectacularly bad day.
He had a bad day at the Battle of Fredericksburg. He's going to have a really good day at Gettysburg because
for a while.
Until he gets shot. But I mean, he's going to make some really crucial decisions, and this is where I credit Meade. So Meade delegates authority to Reynolds. He's not like McClellan. McClellan would never have done that. McClellan was always very vigilant in maintaining complete control over the movements of his troops and whether they could become engaged or not. Meade is clear to Reynolds, here's my commander's intent. Here's what I'm looking for. I want to move into Pennsylvania, but I want to, wherever the enemy is strongest, that's where I need to concentrate my army. And I want to fight them to advantage. So don't do anything stupid, but I'm delegating a lot of authority to you because you're going to be the man on the ground. I know you're smart. I know you're going to make good decisions. And you're not going to commit me to something that you shouldn't commit me to. So that is huge for Meade because it's very hard for commanders to delegate authority like that when you don't have any means of communications. You can't telegraph Reynolds and say, hey, what's going on now? So he creates this left wing, and he's got Buford's cavalry division over there because the intelligence is beginning to build that maybe the main body of the Confederates is in the direction of Chambersburg. He's still got these guys, up in the direction of Carlisle and Harrisburg and York. So he's got to keep the army spread across a 30-mile front to cover all different contingencies. But he's got one man he has great confidence in who can make decisions near where he thinks the greatest concentration of Confederates is. That's huge. So he sets up a situation in which he has delegated his authority to someone. And a critic of Meade might go, well, he was just abdicating command. I'm like, no, that is what a good commander does. A good commander delegates to those commanders, particularly in this era where you can't micromanage stuff with your radio and your satellites and everything like that. A good commander delegates that authority to subordinates underneath them that they trust and expects them to execute. So you contrast it with the Confederates, and it's a completely different story. So the Confederates, they're going to kind of blunder into the Battle of Gettysburg. Yes, it's true they don't have their cavalry with them, their main cavalry. Jeb Stuart.
They have cavalry.
They have cavalry. They don't have cavalry that they could use that could have penetrated John Buford's screen. They don't have that type of cavalry. I mean, the only thing they would have found with that cavalry is that Buford was out there. Even if they closed with Buford. So, in fact, for example, Jenkins' brigade was so undisciplined that the Confederates in Ewell's corps were playing like hot potato. Do you want these guys? They're more trouble than they're worth. I don't really want them. So Lee doesn't really have that, but Lee's intelligence on June 28th or June 30th that he gets is good. He gets this intelligence that Meade's in command of the army, or on June 28th, he gets the intelligence, Meade's in command of the army, so they got a new commander. All right, that's good. And The other thing is the Union Army's in Frederick. Okay, they're a lot closer than I thought they were. He thought they were still down in northern Virginia and hadn't crossed the Potomac yet. And then he gives his orders for the Army to concentrate around Cashtown, west of Gettysburg. And you might question, what's he concentrating in Cashtown? Well, it's a convenient place to concentrate the Army in case the Union Army got here faster than you thought. It's a very defensible position.
Sure.
Right? So if you can concentrate there and the Union Army's not up yet, you're definitely going to Gettysburg next, because this crossroads, it gives you offensive, defensive possibilities. That's where you're going to go next. So he's, his army's concentrating. And then on June 30th, when Henry Heath, whose division has occupied Cashtown, when Henry Heath orders a brigade to march to Gettysburg that day to search the town for supplies, that was Pettigrew's brigade, and he tells Pettigrew not to bring on an engagement, but the only thing he's going to run into is local militia.
Is this the famous
Right?
shoe mission? Is this where
This is where the shoe myth grows out of.
Okay. Yeah.
So the mission is to gather supplies.
I didn't mean to say mission. I meant to say myth. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry. Yeah.
It's gather supplies and shoes. I mean, because everybody's wearing their shoes out. In fact, I've read more accounts of Union soldiers in the Gettysburg campaign whose shoes were worn out than Confederate soldiers. So
There's a great picture on one of the Civil War trails, wayside markers in Frederick, of Federal soldiers in town, I think, right before or after Jackson's troops in 60. I'm sorry, no, that photo is actually, I fell into an old trope right there. That famous photograph of Confederates is, you know about this? It's 64, and it's early. It's not Jackson in 62. You know the famous photo?
Potentially.
Oh, you mean
I'm a big fan of this.
The one in Frederick?
Yes, I'm a big fan of this.
Yeah,
These guys have,
I'm not sure about that.
I'm big. Well,
Yeah.
we'll get into that another day. But I think
Yeah.
there's federal troops that are photographed within a week or so, or a couple of days of that. But they all have their shoes slung over their bayonets, or over their rammers. And when I was younger, I asked about that, and they were like, a lot of guys when they would get to these like kind of smoother roads would take their shoes off because these shoes would wear out. So
Yeah.
there's like a full company of guys, like it looks like attempting to preserve their leather shoes. So
Well, they did. I mean, the shoes did wear out a lot, but my understanding is that if you got on these macadamized roads in bare feet, you weren't going far.
right.
You were not going far. And those are and once you get into Pennsylvania, they're the best roads, the fastest roads. So the Chambersburg Pike, the York Pike, the Baltimore Pike. If you don't have shoes, you're done.
They try to
you're not-
continue that legacy in the Pennsylvania Turnpike today.
Yeah, that's very true.
Get out of the left lane in that one as well. If you know the theme on our show, get out of the left lane.
Yeah.
All right, so obviously this isn't just a myth to go get shoes, because the whole army is, every time the Confederate army seems to come into the North, they're so ragged and they have no shoes, and like, this is not that.
No, the Confederate Army is well equipped and well uniformed. It's just that you know that shoes are always hard to get.
Sure.
So if you're going into a decent-sized Pennsylvania community, even if Jubal Early's already been there, look it over and try to find any shoes, because you're going to put them in your wagons and issue them as men need them. So you're always looking to not just get something for today, you're looking for something for tomorrow as well. So Pettigrew's orders are, to search the town for supplies, and then he marches towards the town. He's warned twice on the march into town that Union cavalry is approaching the town. The second time he's warned, he's told it's Buford's division. The second guy who warns him is supposedly a spy who worked for Longstreet. Maybe it was Harrison the spy. I don't know. But the important part of the story is that Pettigrew is on the alert. He gets west of Willoughby Run, which is kind of on the edge of the first day's battlefield. And when he gets out there, he rides ahead with the skirmish line all the way up to the seminary. When he gets up there to the seminary, he can see, looking to the south on the Emmitsburg Road, he sees the cavalry coming up towards town. So he realizes, I can't go into town without a fight. So he turns around, he marches back, takes everybody back, gets back to Cashtown, explains to Henry Heath that he couldn't go into Gettysburg because Union cavalry had arrived. He was told it was Buford's division. Heath, of course, tells him, no, you're wrong.
Your eyes deceive you, lad. You don't know what you saw.
And then A.P. Hill arrives in Cashtown, and then Pettigrew repeats what he's seen, and A.P. Hill explains that he's just come from a meeting with Lee, and at the latest intelligence was the Union Army was still around Middleburg, I think they said, about 20 miles south of the Pennsylvania line. So the main body of the Union Army is still well over a day's march, the whole army, from the Pennsylvania line. So, whatever he saw, it can't be much. Maybe it's something from the army. It's just a little observation force, probably militia. This guy Pettigrew hasn't been with us since the 7 days battles. He might be a little jumpy, and veterans get I was thinking this morning for some reason about Band of Brothers, and there's this one great episode where Webster, the guy who went to Harvard, rejoins the unit after he'd been wounded at Holland.
I love this episode.
And then he comes back, and everybody shuns him because he wasn't at Bastogne, right?
That's right.
So you weren't there.
Dude
man.
was at D-Day.
He's at D-Day and he's in Holland, right?
Yeah.
But you weren't there. So anyway, I think, soldiers can be like that, and I think they kind of discounted what Pettigrew had seen. But nevertheless, Hill was convinced that something was in Gettysburg, and he didn't want it there. So he concocts this plan, which is to march 2 divisions to Gettysburg, which tells you that I'm going to make sure whatever's there, we crush it, and we seize that area so that nobody else can get in there. And he also takes the precaution to alert Ewell's Corps, which is moving north of Gettysburg, to change their route of march to Cashtown, to come down from the north through Gettysburg to Cashtown. That's a precaution because if A.P. Hill runs into something he didn't expect, Ewell would come in on their rear and right flank. Yeah. Anyway, so the question always comes up, did Lee know anything about this? And I'm like, you're talking about 4 divisions of the Army of Northern Virginia, which has 9. Yes.
Yeah.
There's not a chance that Lee wasn't aware of it. And I think that Lee didn't have any problem with it because he didn't see any danger in the movement. He thought it was a routine sort of operation. The Union Army is not up close enough. This is a sufficient force. I want to occupy Gettysburg anyway. This will create more room for Longstreet's Corps and the rest of Ewell's Corps when they arrive in the Cashtown area anyway. So, yeah, fine. I don't have a problem with it. I don't think Lee saw any risk in this movement. And he also felt that he had given clear instructions to his subordinates was, don't bring on a general engagement.
Right.
Yeah. Pretty simple. Don't do it. But they're like, we're going to do it.
Yeah, and he's, Stuart gets all the blame, and this is where you get into the historiography and the memory of the battle, is that, Stuart gets killed in the war, so he can't defend himself.
Exactly.
And Henry Heath lives for a while after the war, and Heath can defend himself and his reputation and his record. So what Heath is going to try and do is say, oh, the real problem was we didn't have Jeb Stuart there. That's what really happened. When the reality was Heath just exercised poor judgment and, all around on July 1. And it is going to lead. And also A.P. Hill, who may not have been feeling well, we don't really know what was going on with him. Yeah. He's hanging out in Cashtown. And you contrast that with the first person to arrive of the 1st Army Corps is Reynolds. That's the first person to arrive.
Yeah.
And so he's on hand to make decisions immediately, whereas A.P. Hill, when Henry Heath makes decisions that are going to bring on an engagement, Hill's not there to change things. And when he arrives, things already started. Mm-hmm. So, Heath comes marching along. He encounters Buford's cavalry. Buford manages his men just beautifully. Yeah. I mean, he's such a good cavalry commander. If you look at the whole campaign regularly, Buford accomplishes his mission with the least casualties. Kilpatrick may accomplish his mission. He's going to lose a lot of men.
Losing a lot cavalry. Of yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, so Buford, he's just does such a good job. And, one of the other myths about Buford is that everybody is along the Chambersburg Pike. His cavalry extends from the Hagerstown Road all the way to the Baltimore Pike. So Devon's brigade of cavalry is the most dispersed. They're on the Mummersburg Road, the Carlisle Road, the Old Harrisburg Road, the York Road, the Hanover Road, and the Baltimore Pike. They're picketing all those roads and in between those roads. So, have a brigade that's, I think it was less than 1,000 men, or about 1,000 men. That's going to take pretty much your whole brigade is going to be dispersed. Gamble's brigade is the only one that really has any sort of concentration of numbers. But even there, I mean, they don't stand a chance of stopping 7,000-man division of Henry Heath. But Heath, he makes the mistake. And if you read his report, it's really funny when you read his articles that he wrote after the war where he claimed all he was doing was going to Gettysburg looking for shoes. And you contrast that with his report, because when he writes those articles, his report isn't public yet. So he can write anything he wants.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So once the report becomes public knowledge, then it's a different story. But he says right in there that, he encountered what he thought was cavalry, infantry, and artillery. So the infantry is the dismounted cavalry. He sees the mounted cavalry, and Caliph's battery is the artillery. Right. So he presumes that I need to get these guys out of the way because I'm making this reconnaissance. And he also tells us by his decision that he doesn't think he's facing a very formidable force because he has 4 brigades. And normally what a division commander would do, if he's going to make an assault, he's going to put 2 brigades up front, 2 brigades right in support. He puts 2 brigades up front, he keeps the other 2 brigades back. So 2 brigades can do the job. That's what he thinks. So he's got Archer's brigade and he's got Davis's brigade. And, that's a big force. I mean, Davis had, I think, 1,800. Archer had about 1,200. That's 3,000 men that are going to move along either side of the Chambersburg Pike. And I think he's confident that that force can handle anything that's in its path. He doesn't need the other 2 brigades. And so you contrast that with Reynolds. He comes on the field, gets briefed by Buford what the situation is. And the way I see it is based on his orders, Reynolds has 3 options that are open to him. One option is the safest, you would say, and that is to withdraw back towards the Maryland-Pennsylvania line. Buford will screen, he'll pull everybody back. That gets him closer to the main body of the army. It's the safest course. It surrenders the initiative to the enemy. Not a good move, necessarily, but it's the safest move. His second choice he could have made is say, you resist them out here. As I rode up to Gettysburg, I can see what the best defensive terrain is. I'm going to form my troops there. So Cemetery Hill, Culp's Hill, Cemetery Ridge.
Fall back and meet us there kind of situation.
Well, yeah, that's where I'm going to make my battle.
Right.
And then the third option, which is the riskiest one, is to fight the enemy beyond the town. So you're going to have the town to your rear. You're going to be outnumbered because Buford has been able to tell you A.P. Hill's corps is there, Longstreet's behind him, and Ewell's north of us, and they're all close. So they got way more guys close to Gettysburg than we do. And if you're going to make this choice to fight them outside the town, there's a huge risk associated with that. But on the other hand, I think the way Reynolds probably views this is, I have to trade men for time. Mm-hmm. Because where we want to fight the battle is back there on those hills. But I don't want to start the battle there. Because if I get knocked off those hills,
I got nothing to do.
We lost it.
Right.
So I'm going to fight him out here. And if I get, because he also gives some hint to this when his staff officer tells Meade he's going to defend the approaches to Gettysburg and he'll barricade the streets if necessary. So he's determined to try to keep the Rebs from the high ground south of town. And then the rest of the army, based on what Meade has told him, is going to march and concentrate where the enemy's shown the greatest force. Here. And what Reynolds has seen, this is a really good position. This is where we should fight them. So Reynolds, a long story short, makes the boldest decision he could have made, which is we're going to fight them here, and I'm going to take this risk. I also think that's part of the reason why Reynolds ends up getting killed, is that he realizes he's taking a very big risk, and he's really worried that his troops aren't going to get some of the key terrain out there before the Confederates do. And that's one of the reasons why he's in the edge of Hearp's Woods when the Iron Brigade comes up, is he's got to get those woods. Those woods are critical to denying the enemy the ability to use the Chambersburg Pike and the Hagerstown Road. I have to hold the woods, so I need these guys up here. So rather than using staff officers to do this, he's personally inserting himself in the battle to make sure his men know we got to do this. And of course, it gets him killed.
Yeah, like this is serious. I am here.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Before we get too much into the infantry fight, I'm a huge Iron Brigade guy, so I definitely am enjoying this. When it comes to John Buford and the Federal Cavalry, they have an excellent day. They have an excellent morning. But it's often portrayed, probably for the dramatic effect, that they're just on the brink. They're being pushed right to the brink of breaking, and then the First Corps comes swinging in and kind of seizes the day and is able to save them, more or less. But when you look at the reports and you look at the casualties, it really doesn't play out that way.
Yeah.
Buford fights his command extremely well, as you said, but he fights it really efficiently. He doesn't have that many, as terrible as it is to say, he doesn't have that many casualties.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. The greatest number of casualties that Buford suffers on July the 1st is in the afternoon of July the 1st, when the Confederates are making their final assault and Perrin's brigade is attacking Seminary Ridge, and Buford dismounts part of Gamble's brigade south of the Hagerstown Road, or the Fairfield Road, and that is a hard fight. They inflicted really heavy casualties on the two right regiments of Perrin's brigade, but they also took most of their casualties that day then. The losses in the morning were really small. Right. It was really small. I mean, it would have been an insignificant skirmish in the scheme of things if the battle hadn't developed after that. Burkett Fry, who was a regimental commander in Archer's brigade, wrote a letter after the war, and he said, as to the resistance to the cavalry, he says it was insignificant. We just drove them right out of the way. They just kept falling back. So all they're doing is just harassment. They're just harassing them. It's
buying time.
Again, we were always influenced by, like, the film Gettysburg.
Sure.
Right? And you get this idea, it's like the Alamo.
Every time you've been talking, I've been like, dude, you're a legitimate park ranger historian. Stop thinking about the movie, because you're mentioning all these guys and like you gamble. I'm like, he has the most awkward scene in that whole movie where he just sits there with Buford. And I'm stuck. Like I'm listening to a legend tell a story in my studio, and I'm stuck thinking about the stupid movie. That's what the oversaturation of this has all done to me. Is like, I want to get back into the actual battle and get out of the movie.
It's hard to get out of the movie, because the movie, I mean, and I'm not really a critic of the movie, and there's a lot of hokey stuff in the movie, but the movie generated a tremendous amount of interest in Gettysburg, and it did a great service in that respect. The movie did its job. Yeah, right.
We just misinterpret what its job was.
Yeah, but it's and you also get the idea that, Buford was this loner. He didn't care about his staff or his men, and it was completely untrue. I mean, he loved his staff. He knew everything about his staff. He knew who their kids were, when they were going to get married, and everything about him. He died in the arms of one of his staff officers from disease. So, and he cared about his men. It was clear as day that he always cared about his men, because he always made sure that he used tactics that minimize their casualties and maximize their effectiveness. So,
but Sam Elliott played him, and he cannot be sensitive. He's just badass.
He's great. He's great. I mean,
he's
Elliott,
probably a real sweetheart in real life.
Elliott was fantastic, and Elliott did a lot of research about Buford. But the thing was, that people sometimes forget about the movie Gettysburg, is it was based on the novel The Killer Angels and on a script written from the novel. Right. So if you were Martin Sheen playing Lee, or you were Sam Elliott playing Buford, you played the way he was written in the script and in the book. Sure. Not the way he was in real life. You tried to get some of that in there, which Buford, I think, did. Or, excuse me, I think Elliott did. I think all the actors did to the degree that they could. Yeah. But you were still playing the characters that Michael Shera created. Yes. Not necessarily what a historian would say these people were like.
Right. So I think we can't say that enough. We can just, the rest of the show can just be devoted to that. It's a movie. It's a movie. Jesus Christ, it's a movie. But no, I'm glad we kind of got that joke out of the way. But I gotta be honest. Like, as we talk, I'm like, my brain is so stuck on this stupid movie. So, but it did do its job, because I was a kid. when it came out, I was at 93 or whatever. I was like 7 years old. Matt was already 45.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
But no, like
Not 45 now.
at the time that I get into things, I was getting into things. It came along at that right moment.
Yeah.
So it did its job. But yeah, it is not the story we're telling. Is not the
Right.
I always forget his name. Turner. It's not the Turner version.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah, and I mean the thing is also in a movie there's all sorts of really crucial players in the historical drama that have to be left out because you can't confuse a viewer with all these different characters are coming and going, and so I mean Reynolds is kind of a non-entity in the movie, but Reynolds shapes the battle because he's made this decision. I'm going to trade men for time. We're going to seize this ground out here. So what does the ground that Reynolds is trying to seize mean? It has no value to the Union Army. It's not key terrain, right? The only value it has is the Rebs have to fight and lose men to take it. That's your whole purpose, is to buy time, is to trade men for time. And the other thing that Reynolds did that was just so smart is the night before on June 30th, he met with both Howard and then Doubleday, and he got all of his maps out. He did this with Howard. He got all his maps out, and they war gamed the situation. So if they do this, we might do this, blah blah blah. So Howard understood all of Reynolds' orders.
Where does this take place?
This takes place at the Moritz Tavern.
Okay, so not in Frederick.
No, just south of Gettysburg, about 5 miles.
When the army's in Frederick, John Fulton Reynolds has a relative he's supposed to have like a meal day with, lunch or dinner, and doesn't get to keep that day because like the army business. I was like, I wonder if he's doing the gaming thing instead.
No, that's on June 30th because he's received some intelligence reports. He's got his orders from Meade. And he's just smart in that, I mean, these guys are learning as the war is going on, is that something could happen to me. So I want you to know what our mission is. And I want you to know where everybody else is. So he shares that with Howard. He shares that with Doubleday. When he's killed, Howard and Doubleday are able to make intelligent decisions about what they should do because they're not lost because he's not Stonewall Jackson who doesn't tell you anything, right? Right. And then you're lost. You're like, what are we doing? What do we do? And the most likely course that anybody's going to take in that situation is they're going to retreat, right? They're not going to stay out there and fight. They're going to retreat. So Doubleday picks his defensive position. Howard assumes command on the field. Howard is not a great general by any stretch of the imagination, but he does have the courage to do what he thinks that Reynolds would have done, which is to defend the western and northern approaches to Gettysburg. So he's going to push the 11th Corps out north of town. He's going to keep the 1st Corps out west of town. He's going to appeal for help. He's not really going to get it because Henry Slocum is just going to kind of meander his way up from Littlestown and kind of avoid taking responsibility for what could end up being a defeat. So, I credit Howard there with sticking to it, saying, this is what I'm going to do. We're going to fight here. And then on the Confederate side, some people have questioned, why did they continue the battle? Well, because they can't open up the ORs and look at the order of battle of the Army of the Potomac and know where everybody is. They're engaged. So once you're engaged, the doctrine of the Army in Northern Virginia is don't sit back and wait for them to implement what they want to do. Get them. Go after them, right? So
create an initiative and seize it.
Yeah, when Ewell comes on the field, and Ewell's one of those generals at Gettysburg. Our memory of Ewell is greatly shaped by Douglas Southall Freeman.
Oh, yeah.
And which is a completely negative view. And then Clifford Doughty. I mean, these historians came along. They were great newspaper men. They wrote really, really well. But they loved Lee, and they were always looking for, who was the scapegoat. So if you look at Ewell, when he comes on the field, he gets this message from Lee, which is, don't bring on a general engagement, right? So if the enemy is encountered, don't bring on a general engagement. So the indecisive Ewell that is created by Freeman and these others, when he gets on the field, well, he's not going to do anything, right? He's indecisive. What do? I'm not going to do anything. he was really decisive. He comes on the field. He's like, guess what? Too
Don't
late.
bring on a general engagement.
Too late. It's already started.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Already started. Engagement's on. We're going to get him. Let's go after him right now. I know Early's coming down. He's going to come in on their flank. We got a good position. Let's get him. Let's attack. And then, the Confederate commanders do a really poor job, and I don't know whether this is A.P. Hill's fault or maybe partially Ewell's fault, but they don't coordinate at all. So Ewell mounts his attack with Rhodes' division, and I think when Rhodes makes his attack from Oak Hill on the right of the First Corps, from what they can see of the First Corps, they can easily handle it. Rhodes got about 8,000 men. I mean, they can easily handle this. They're going to roll this flank up. The 11th Corps is just beginning to come out of town. So they're going to send one brigade down into the valley, entertain these guys with that brigade, keep them kind of at bay. Before too long, Early's going to come in on the flank of those guys anyway. So Rhodes will make this main attack. We're not getting any help from these guys over here that we see sitting on the ridge. And part of the reason they aren't going to get any help is because once the battle develops in the afternoon of July the 1st, Lee has arrived. So Lee's not happy. He sees a battle developing, which he doesn't want.
Was I not clear?
Right.
Like, what? Yeah.
Yeah. So, and when Henry Heath comes to him, because he can see around the McPherson barn, he sees Stone's brigade shifting some regiments to face Rhodes' troops. And he goes back to Lee and A.P. Hill, says, hey, they're moving troops from my front to face Ewell. I think I should attack. And Lee says, no, I'm not bringing on a general engagement. So he doesn't want this battle to get any bigger. And then, of course, the battle becomes this incredibly bloody fight. The initial attack is a debacle. Iverson's brigade is mauled in the fight. They lose probably 1,000 men out of 1,500.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of them are, many of them are POWs, and a number of those POWs are liberated later in the day. But still, the brigade is just wrecked. O'Neill's brigade is hurt really bad. But they reorganize, and they use completely different tactics when they go back after them. They don't use these line of battle. They use swarms of skirmishers and just wear the Yankees down. And then finally, when you get, now it's 2:30 in the afternoon, and when Heath goes back to Lee and asks Lee permission to advance, then this time Lee goes, okay. And then that's when Heath is going to advance at about 3 o'clock on his front. And that's going to be the bloodiest fighting of the Battle of Gettysburg is going to occur then. Everybody always thinks it's Pickett's Charge or it's Little Round Top or it's the Wheat Field. But the two regiments that suffer the highest losses of the battle, the 24th Michigan, 26th North Carolina, fight in Herbst Woods.
Scott, you can't do this. You're shattering the Chamberlainites' dream that everything happened over on Little Round Top. The whole battle was Little Round Top. You can't shatter that.
The battle in Herbst Woods is horrifying. It is just horrifying. It is a bloodbath. The 26th North Carolina loses 500 men.
Oh.
It's unbelievable. The 24th Michigan has 99 men killed and mortally wounded. Every regiment of the Iron Brigade loses more than 50% of its strength. It is, it's kind of like, the honor of the old North State is at stake here, and the honor of the memory of the Iron Brigade is at stake. So nobody's going to give ground. So it's just a slugfest. And also Stone's brigade around the McPherson farm, they fight really, really well. This is their first really big battle. They fight really well. But, the Confederates have the numbers. They are able to outflank the Federal line along McPherson's Ridge, and then they have to fall back to Seminary Ridge. But the thing is, in the horrible arithmetic of war, they're accomplishing their mission because Heath's division now is combat ineffective. They've lost so many men. They have to bring Pender's division through to continue the attack. And the mistake they're going to make is that they see the Yankees retreating. They think they've got the Yankees on the run. They're disorganized. So what do? Don't maneuver. Another punch, pursue. So Pender's division goes right into the teeth, and what they don't realize is that all the First Corps artillery had been moved back to Seminary Ridge and unlimbered. So when they come over McPherson's Ridge, the artillery just obliterates Scales's brigade. It just obliterates it. I mean, the brigade is just cut to pieces, and is stopped in its track in the low ground between McPherson's Ridge, or eastern McPherson's Ridge, and Seminary Ridge. And what saves the bacon of the Confederates on this part of the front is Perrin's brigade just maneuvers unbelievably under fire. And they find a seam in the Union defenses on Seminary Ridge where there's not any fire coming at them because there's nobody there. And they infiltrate one of their regiments that gets on the flank of the Federal defending in front of the seminary, and then the whole Union line unravels. So everything starts to collapse. And meanwhile, north of them, along Oak Ridge, where the right of the First Corps was, Rhodes' division has kind of worn down those defenders. And also those defenders can look down in the valley where the 11th Corps is, the Union 11th Corps, and they see Early's division has arrived, and Early's division has outflanked the 11th Corps, and the 11th Corps is in full retreat back towards Gettysburg. So the right flank of the First Corps realizes, and they're going to lose 1,600 prisoners.
That's got to be demoralizing for the 11th Corps. I think they're up against the same guys that smacked them in the face at Chancellorsville, like unit to unit. So like they're running twice.
Yeah, and they just were really badly served both times. I mean, there were so many fiascos. Howard's in full command of the field, so he delegates 11th Corps command to Schurz. And Schurz's plan was actually a pretty good plan, which was he was going to push his division and half of Barlow's division out. They would be west of the Carlisle Pike. And then Barlow's other brigade would be an echelon to the right rear to protect the line and be closer to Gettysburg. And why that doesn't happen is that while Schurz is up on the front, like observing Rhodes's men up on Oak Hill, Howard comes out with Barlow's division and sends Barlow's division out the Old Harrisburg Road. Barlow goes out the Old Harrisburg Road, and he gets out to near the county poorhouse, the almshouse. And when he gets out there, they start taking sharpshooter fire from these woods that are on the northern slope of Barlow's Knoll, which is, about 600 yards to the north of where Barlow is. So Barlow decides, on his own initiative, to move his division there. So when Barlow moves his division to Barlow's Knoll, he's created this big gap between Schimmelpfennig's division and Barlow's division, and now Schurz, when he comes back and sees this...
One more time, what was that name?
Schimmelpfennig?
Yeah, one of my favorites.
When Schurz comes back and sees this, well, it's too late. Barlow's already died, cast the die. You have to help him. And he's coming under attack from Early's division. So now Schurz is reacting to what Barlow has done. And meanwhile, Schurz has sent back 3 couriers to Oliver Otis Howard and Cemetery Hill saying, I need a brigade from our reserve, which is Orland Smith's division on Cemetery Hill. I need 1 brigade. And what he wanted to do with that brigade was to place that brigade in echelon to Barlow to protect and cover the flank so that they couldn't get rolled up and get driven in. Howard, in very characteristic Howard fashion, doesn't do anything. He fails to send the brigade until it's too late. When he finally sends Coster's brigade, the only thing that Coster's brigade can do is hastily deploy right on the northeastern edge of Gettysburg, and they just get obliterated by Early's division. And the whole line gets rolled up. It just adds more to the casualties and places Cemetery Hill at greater risk because now you only have 1 formed brigade left up there. So the whole thing collapses. Everybody is in retreat. It's a mess in town. Guys are exhausted. They're running into houses to hide. People don't know where they're supposed to go. The Confederates are in hot pursuit. They're all the way into the center of town, shooting people left and right, and it's really, really wild. But the bulk of the Union soldiers seem to know that we should go to Cemetery Hill, and they could see where it was, and they make their way up there. And by that point, when Meade had learned that Reynolds had been wounded, he ordered Winfield Hancock, commander of the 2nd Corps, to go to Gettysburg and take command. Because I think Meade didn't have a tremendous amount of confidence in Howard. So he wants somebody that he really trusts on the ground who can give him an assessment of the terrain should we fight a battle here.
Sure.
And, of course, Hancock is junior to Howard. Howard's senior in commission date. But Meade has fortunately been given the discretion to disregard that in the periods of emergency. When your commission date is seniority. So Hancock gets up there, and they make a big deal about the whole Hancock-Howard controversy. I really don't think there was a controversy. It was embarrassing for Howard because it was a definite statement like, the boss doesn't trust you.
Yeah,
Really?
yeah. So we're going to skip you.
I mean, really. He just didn't trust him. And I think it was clear to Howard. But they seem to work things out pretty well. I'll take care of things on this side of the road. You see the things on this side of the road. But I think Howard understood Hancock's in command. He's in charge. And they start to bring some order. It's a very good position. Their artillery, they only lost one artillery piece in the retreat in the 1st Corps and 2 in the 11th Corps. So they got away. They were really, really lucky. The chief of artillery of the 1st Corps, Charles Wainwright, he has a great journal in the war.
Yeah.
And he writes in his journal, he's like, man, I can't believe we got out of there with losing only one gun. Because at one point when he's leaving, these Confederates of Perrin's brigade are climbing onto the breastworks, like in shouting distance, and shouting to him to surrender.
He's like, no!
Yeah, so...
and Wainwright's a guy who's got an opinion on everything.
Oh, yeah. He's really good. I mean, he can back up his brag, but yes, he is very opinionated about stuff, and he's very elite in kind of his view of people in the world.
I can relate to that.
But they, they do a good job of, organizing a defense up there. They're going to get some reinforcements. Stannard's brigade is going to arrive, and then the 12th Corps is going to begin to arrive. And what they do with those units when they arrive is they kind of form what is going to become the fishhook. So Stannard is in position down near the direction of the Pennsylvania Monument. That's where his brigade is, the lower end of Cemetery Ridge.
That's how they knew where to go. Monument.
Right. Some of the exactly. Some of the 1st Corps units are placed right near the angle where Pickett's charge will hit on July the 3rd. A brigade, or actually part of a whole division of the 12th Corps, Geary's division, is placed on the north slope of Little Round Top. And then the 12th Corps is massed east of Culp's Hill. So they're east and kind of south of Culp's Hill. So you've got troops in position in a lot of different places that, it's a decent line. I mean, it's got a lot of gaps and holes in it.
The important parts are starting to be held. The real important parts.
I mean, I did this program once years ago with all the officers of the 1st Armored Brigade of the British Army came over to the U.S.
Wow.
And what they told me is they're like, you guys do such a good job in interpreting and preserving your battlefields that we don't have anything like this.
Well, because, it's an island and they have to exist.
That we can go to in Europe even. They're like, there's nothing like this. So
I believe that.
this is really good. And the other thing was they said, our officers don't really know Gettysburg, a lot of them. I mean, they haven't studied it because they've looked at, like, World War II battles and things like that. Anyway, so they come over there, and what I did with them is I put them in the role of Reynolds. I gave them all the original correspondence that Reynolds had. And I then set them up with what happened on the morning of July the 1st. So they knew what Reynolds' mission was. They knew what Reynolds knew of where the Confederate Army was. They knew where all the Union Army Corps were. So they knew everything Reynolds knew. Nothing he didn't know. So I didn't tell him, like, this is East Division, there's Pender's Division, it's A.P. Hill's Corps. A Corps is 30,000 men. That's what you think. All right. And then after I'd done all this stuff, then they said, okay, break up in your signatures, they call them, which was 3 officers. And they would break up. And they said, you have 20 minutes or whatever they gave them. You've come back with your plan. So what's your plan? And it was amazing when they came back. Almost all of them did what Reynolds said. But some of the things that always interested me is they wanted to know how long did it take for a division to deploy from column to line. They wanted to know what the condition of the road was that went up over Little Round Top, Wheatfield Road. They all blocked that. All of them blocked that. It was really, really interesting because, I mean, it kind of drove home. Here's professional soldiers confronted with a situation that they didn't really know much about, and they had the same information that Reynolds had, and they made basically the same decision that Reynolds did. Now, some did some variations on it, but I found that really fascinating.
Yeah, that's an interesting
really
study.
cool.
Yeah.
But, you're just assessing the situation as it is, and there's what you can do and there's what you can't do.
Yeah.
That's pretty neat.
Yeah. Yeah. So, when you consider the Confederate side, the end of the first day, I mean, there's all these myths emerge, and you're never, ever going to eliminate the myths. You try the best you can. But the myth is Lee sends Ewell an order, take Cemetery Hill if practicable. Right?
Yes,
So,
the
right?
famous order.
So it's Ewell. It's all on Ewell. Ewell's the guy, and Ewell can't make a decision, right? So Ewell's indecisive. He can't decide what to do. But often what gets left out of that is the full order. Take Cemetery Hill practicable, but don't bring on a general engagement.
Theme here.
Yeah, so I used to love in giving a program to put people in Ewell's shoes and say, okay, what does that mean?
Yeah, exactly.
What does Lee mean by that? And I said, I don't know. I mean, this is how I would interpret it if I was Ewell. If attacking Cemetery Hill is going to commit us to a battle here tomorrow, don't. If attacking Cemetery Hill is going to take the hill tonight, do.
Yeah.
So I'm leaving the discretion up to you. Now, the other point I make to people is I say, what help is he offering you?
None. It sounds
Zero.
Like, yeah, it
Zero.
sounds like none.
Is there any help available?
No.
Not a lot.
What's Heath and Pender doing? Pender's got 2 brigades and doing any fighting, really. You can't use them. Anderson's division, which is along Belmont Schoolhouse Ridge, which is about 3 miles west of Gettysburg. You can't bring them up. Nobody. No help. No coordination. Army headquarters is going to offer you no support and no coordination. Not even coordination with artillery support. Nothing. It's all on you. That gets left out of the story. And that, to me, is a huge part of the equation of why Ewell makes a decision.
Well, it does 2 things. One, it keeps the St. Robert E. Lee myth alive and shiny. And it also pads the you cannot replace Stonewall Jackson.
Bingo.
You just can't. This man, you seen him hitting the gym? You see his monument, bro? But, like, it reinforces that, like, Lee forever lost that right arm and all. But, like, to me, that's what I'm hearing is you say that is, like, the truth betrays that.
Right.
And, like, that's, sorry if it sucks to suck out there for y'all out there, but, like, Ewell, I think, does what any rational person would do. He interprets the order the way that I think. I've always, by the way, you said that to me, is if you can do it today, do it. If it's going to bring on this big thing tomorrow, don't. Like, and I think he makes a decision decisively.
Right.
No.
Right.
Can't take this hill.
I have to attack the hill from the toughest part.
Yeah.
I have no support on my flank.
Yeah.
He gets a report that there is a Union force east of Gettysburg, which was the 12th Corps. He doesn't know what it is. He has no. He does have Jenkins cavalry,
Right.
but they're not really helping much, right? So
they've also been doing a lot of marching, a lot of fighting already. They are burned out.
Yeah.
He doesn't know what's up there. There is something up there,
right.
And so, yes.
And you have literally no intelligence about the Union Army.
Right.
So if you're Oliver Otis Howard or you're Hancock or you're Doubleday, you know the guys you're fighting are Ewell and A.P. Hill. You already know it. And Army intelligence tells you that full strength, those 2 corps are about 60,000 men. So you know what you're up against. If you're Ewell, well, we've taken prisoners from the 11th Corps and the 1st Corps and probably Buford's division. We know they're here. Is there anybody else here? Because there's a whole lot more Union soldiers. So if I'm going to take this risk and I've got a Union force on my left flank, no support on my right flank, I don't think it's a good idea. I think let's wait till the morning.
All right, hypothetical question. We usually avoid these on the show. With what Ewell has, do you think he could have taken the hill?
It'd have been tough.
Yeah.
It would have been really tough. He might have, but I mean, because you never know.
That's why we hate hypotheticals.
Right. Well, you never know what's going to happen with morale. I mean, a unit breaks and all of a sudden it starts spreading to other units, and then the next thing you know, the whole Union defense collapses, and then bam, or they don't, and they repulse the Confederate attack with heavy losses.
Well, we're going to get there when we get to the angle, because there's, like, I got to get myself ready. I watched the Civil War Journal episode again this morning, just to kind of like put myself into like, I wanted my mind to be nostalgic and informative and all these things. But there was a point when they were talking about that where a single unit, 69th Pennsylvania, I believe, stands their ground. Yeah, and we'll get there, but like that really affected things. And so anyway, that's a point. Put a pin in it. We're going to come back to that. But cool. Yeah. So that concludes the fighting for the day. And then, of course, I mean, there are even people second-guessing Ewell at the time, real time, second-guessing that they should have pushed on. They didn't understand why they didn't push on. And you can also question, what was Lee thinking? Why does Lee keep Anderson's division, which is about 7,000 men, back, west of town? Well, he doesn't know where the rest of the Union Army is. Exactly. That's his reserve. So he's not going to commit them, because I don't think at that moment in time he's decided, I'm going to fight here again tomorrow if this goes on. He's going to make that decision before the day is out. But at that moment in time, like late afternoon when he sends these orders to Ewell, I'm not sure Lee had made up his mind as to what he was going to do the next day. And then that's going to change pretty quickly, because I think as he assesses the situation, he decides that, I don't really have anywhere to maneuver. And based on what I'm learning, I'm only facing 2 corps and a cavalry division, and I'm better concentrated than them. So rather than try to maneuver, I'm going to fight them here. It's not the battlefield I chose, but I have the advantage in numbers, so I'm going to go after him. So and of course, Longstreet's arrived by that point. His men aren't up, but Longstreet's there. And of course, Longstreet is completely opposed to fighting any sort of an offensive battle in Pennsylvania. So he immediately starts trying to dissuade Lee of this idea. And, it's funny in the historiography of Gettysburg, you have all these fans who, cling to one guy or the other guy, and that, in the Killer Angels, I mean, Longstreet's kind of the hero of that. He's the modern thinking guy, and Lee's just this guy, hey, diddle up the middle. But I think there was a reason why Lee was the Army commander and Longstreet was a Corps commander. Right. And when Longstreet was an independent commander, he wasn't very good, because I don't think Longstreet was a great independent commander. And one of the reasons he wasn't is he could be predictable in the way he operated. And he tended to take the safer course on things. And in Lee's case, Lee always understands when you have the initiative, you have the advantage. You may not have as many men as them, but when you have the initiative, you have the advantage. Yeah, I see what you're talking about, Longstreet. Yeah, they have a strong position. But we have the initiative. We choose where to attack them. They have to try to figure out where we're coming. So, here's Longstreet out. I mean, and of course, one of the other things that always emerges is that, Longstreet made the suggestion, take the whole army and get around between Washington. How are you going to do that? Your cavalry's not with you. You're in enemy territory. Every movement you make is going to be reported on. You don't know where 5 Union Army Corps and 2 cavalry divisions are. Right. You're not going to execute. You're not even going to attempt what Longstreet's suggesting. You've got your army there. And I think the other thing that people sometimes lose sight of is how difficult it is to move an army from point A to point B.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think people forget that armies aren't just those red and blue bombs they see in documentary graphics.
Yeah, right,
like, these are people with things and equipment and animals and who are stubborn, and there's so much that goes into moving people anywhere.
Yeah.
I have children, and moving children is a nightmare.
And getting tens of thousands of people and animals fed every day is a huge job in itself. And then moving them from point A to point B. And so once you've got everybody in this one place and you can maneuver there, I think that's what Lee's like.
God, just shift the block over.
Right.
That's how we do it. Just shift the block.
Yeah.
I think that's a really important point. I mean, these are huge logistical endeavors. You can't just do it. I want to jump back to Jeb Stuart for a minute if we can. This isn't like I work in an 18th century park site, right? So we're a lot more modern than this. There are telegraph, right? So Jeb Stuart is not off in bum nowhere. He's in a pretty connected part of Maryland for a lot of this. So does he, I guess a different question before I finish that thought. With the original plan that he's going to link back up, it was around York, you said?
Yeah.
Is there a time frame, like by X date, reasonable, like meet by X amount of time?
There was a, time, kind of a general time frame, I think, towards end of June, they were thinking that they would meet up in the York area.
So was he on schedule, you think? Without this battle taking place right now, you think he's sort of...
He was a little late. He was a little late because the Union cavalry pushed him farther to the east, and then the size of the Union army filling all the roads, he had to get around them. That pushed him farther to the east, and that's what caused him to get delayed in getting into York. Okay. And then by the time he gets to York, of course, Ewell's already received his orders from Lee to march to Cashtown, so he's gone. And, the Confederate Army was never like a great army for staff work. So you might imagine that he would have left maybe a staff officer there or something like that. And there's nobody there to communicate with Stuart.
So going back to my second question then is he, with the first day raging, I got to imagine with the proximity that a lot of the towns that Jeb is going to be in, up here in Carroll County, Maryland, and stuff like that, like, is he not audibly hearing it? Because I imagine here in Carroll County, the guns of Gettysburg could be heard reasonable. Or the town people down here have to know what's going on. I mean, I imagine people were communicating the info that a great fight was beginning here and stuff like that. Is Jeb in the dark, or is he, like, beginning to hear and beginning this beeline home towards Lee and the rest of the army?
I don't think he hears anything.
So he's unaware.
So, for example, on July the 1st, on the morning of the 1st, when Reynolds is coming up from the south on the Emmitsburg Road, Caleb's battery had already started firing, and some of Heath's artillery was firing. They couldn't hear it.
Really?
Because the acoustics were really weird that day with the humidity. However, July 3rd, the cannonade, they heard it in Harrisburg, they heard it in Westminster. Clearly heard it there.
In Frederick, too.
Right. So on July the 2nd, I'm sure that Stuart, as he starts coming down from the north, is probably hearing the battle at that point in the afternoon. He's probably
like,
hearing it.
Oh, crap.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, it's so Dad.
He knows,
so mad.
That's bad.
Dad is going to be pissed.
That's bad. And he knew it because he was pushing his troopers like crazy to find the army and get back to the army. And it's also clear that nobody is giving him any intel at all, because he goes all the way up to Carlisle, and then he tries to ride back from Carlisle. So he's gone to York, to Carlisle. Man, that's a lot of miles.
He's all over the place.
He's all over the place. He's all over the place. He's putting a huge amount of pressure on his horses and his men. And, when you're moving that much, it's hard to rest your horses and feed your horses and water your horses like you need to. And so his cavalry is getting worn down by this. So it was a real debacle for Stuart, and a real lesson. I mean, he never, ever is going to leave Lee in this situation ever again. He'll never make the same mistake again.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, not only did he get embarrassed, but he got worn out in the process of doing it.
Yeah. So, it was not a good day.
So he just doesn't know for a while until July 1st that any of this is even happening.
No, he doesn't know that. He doesn't even know where the main Union Army went. I mean, it's like, I guess, disappeared in northern Maryland somewhere.
All right, cool. All right, well, I just, play the game. Where in the world is Jeb Stuart? We've had this, the worst. What is our friend Eric, whenever we talk about bloody battles, he always likes to bring up day one at Gettysburg because of how violent it, it's like the 12th. The first day at Gettysburg is like the 12th bloodiest battle of the whole war outright. So it's this heavyweight fight is the analogy I like to use.
It is.
And he has no idea that it's even going on. Jeb is just like...
Doesn't know it's even happening.
It's happening here in Manchester.
So, I mean, if he'd stayed down in this area of Maryland for a couple of days, he would have learned about the battle, because the word would have traveled, would have filtered down this way.
Quickly to hear.
But by the time he's coming through here, he's not learning about it. He's not getting the word. He's moving faster than the word is traveling.
I believe that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And they've cut. And the other thing is, the Confederates have cut all the telephone lines everywhere, or telegraph wires everywhere.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's not like you're going to get information coming through in the telegraph that's going to tell you about there's a big battle
I
going
didn't
on.
think about that. That's
Yeah.
right. With they exist, but they're being cut left and right because people know they exist.
Yeah.
Duh. I'm stupid. All right. So what's the dispositions of the army? We've had the town is in Confederate hands.
Yep.
The high ground, the heights, everything that's really important in terms of tactical advantage is being held by the Federal Army at this point now. Or
Yeah.
all of them, or most of them being held? Like, do the Confederates have anything of value going into what becomes day 2?
No. So when you talk about when you talk
legitimate
about
question.
key terrain at Gettysburg, so terrain, what is the key terrain? Key terrain is the terrain you need to hold to control the battlefield. And the key terrain at Gettysburg, I know there's always people who like to say, this was the key terrain. No, this was the key. No, it's Little Round Top, Cemetery Ridge, Cemetery Hill, Culp's Hill. You have to have all of them.
Right.
You lose any one of them, you're going to lose the battle. You can't hold your position there. You have to have all of those positions. They're all critically important to hold. Big Round Top is the biggest hill. It's not militarily important because it's covered with woods. You have no observation, no field of fire from there, right? So Little Round Top's the one that has a lot of importance. And the Union Army controls all of them. So during the night, the rest of the Army of the Potomac is going to begin to arrive, except for the 6th Army Corps, which is going to have to make a 34-mile march on July 2nd.
Yeah, Cedric is like, we are lost, late. We'll get there. We'll be there.
Yeah, what happens with Sedgwick is that Meade had to make sure, because remember, Ewell had been out towards York. So Sedgwick was the anchor of the right. If the battle had been fought in that direction, if Lee had moved his main body, Sedgwick's corps was going to be the anchor.
Yeah,
for
he's
that
way
line.
out east
He's
of us.
way out there. So that's why he's not out of position. He's in position if that was the direction that the battle had developed. The battle develops in another direction, so he's going to make a long march to join up with the army. And he does a really efficient job of getting his troops
And
there.
they cover ground.
Yeah.
He also sets up the supply depot, and I believe they're in Westminster
Yeah.
for the Army of the Potomac as well.
Yeah, that's going to be their main line of supply. The Baltimore Turnpike is what you'd call the MSR, the main supply route to the Army of the Potomac. It's a macadamized road, so it's crushed stone, packed dirt on top of it. That's a really, it's an all-weather road. So that's one of the really important reasons why you can't lose any of that high ground, because that also protects the MSR, right? So the Baltimore Pike to Westminster. So Sedgwick is the only corps that's on the march. The other corps reached Gettysburg during the night or very early morning, July 2nd, and Meade issues orders. He has a map drawn up by a staff officer named Payne. It's called the Payne map. It's a very crude map, but it shows where every Army Corps Meade wants them in position. The other thing is, when Meade reaches the field, he rides up to Cemetery Hill. Sickles is there, Slocum's there, Howard's there, Doubleday, maybe a couple other. Hancock has left. He's gone back to get the 2nd Corps. And Sickles says to Meade, this looks like good ground. This looks like good ground.
Is this where the good ground quote comes from?
Yes. And Meade says, well, I'm glad to hear it, because it's too late to send the army anywhere else.
Yeah,
Again,
nice.
reflecting a reality of the, just how ponderous an army is to move around. So Meade has already made his decision, contrary to all of his critics, that he never wanted to fight at Gettysburg. He has ordered the whole army there. And has he ever seen a battlefield before? No. He trusts Reynolds initiated this battle. He followed my orders. I trusted him. And Hancock came up here, and Hancock confirmed, he didn't think this was the greatest place in the world to fight a battle, but he thought it was a good place to fight a battle. So my eyes that I delegated authority to have told me this. So you see this delegation of authority from Meade, man, is huge in this battle. So when he gets up there, he's already made his decision. He's going to fight at Gettysburg, and he rides around the ground. There's a moon out, so he can see the ground. He rides around, gets a good view of the terrain, and he knows where he wants everybody to be. So Payne draws this map up. The map's going to be copied and issued to all the corps commanders. And if you're a corps commander, when you get an order, So let's say you're Dan Sickles. All right.
I'd rather not.
You've gotten away with murder, though.
What were your orders going to be? You're not going to get some gigantic, huge document with all these points and things like an op order would be in the military today. You're going to get an order that's going to be like, anchor your left on that hill, tie your right in with Hancock's 2nd Corps. And here's approximately where we want you to be. Here's this map. The discretion of where exactly your brigades are is up to you. You're the Corps commander. You place your men as you see fit on that line that I want you on. So you're not going to dictate to them all the details of how to deploy their troops. So all the professional soldiers in the Army of the Potomac don't have any problem with this. Right? They take their positions. They can see where they're supposed to be. They know what they're supposed to do. They start to occupy their positions in the morning. And Sickles, of course, doesn't. Sickles doesn't. And the way Sickles came into the battlefield is he came up from Emmitsburg. He marched up the Emmitsburg Road. He turned right at the peach orchard. So he sees that ground at the peach orchard. So he can look at that ground. And then he marches down the Wheatfield Road and then takes position north of Little Round Top. He masses the 3rd Corps in the ground north of Little Round Top. He never relieves Geary's division, which is on Little Round Top, on the north slope of Little Round Top. And he was told to relieve Geary's division. And Geary waited for a little while, and then finally Geary's like, I can't wait any longer. I got to go. Yeah. He leaves. I sometimes when people think of these commanders, they're like, well, I mean, Sickles was a Corps commander. He obviously knew what he was doing. Well, he'd been placed in command of a Corps after Fredericksburg. He'd been with that Corps for a little while. He was gone all the time. He was constantly politicking and going back and visiting people and stuff like that. He fights at Chancellorsville. He's very brave. Fights at Chancellorsville. He's very aggressive. Kind of does a similar thing that he does at Gettysburg, where he lunges down when he sees Jackson guys marching by. And then claims he's wounded, leaves the Army, rejoins the Army riding on the same train as the officer bringing the orders to relieve Hooker and place Meade in command. He rides on the same train, rejoins the Army on June 28th. So he hasn't even been with the Army for the whole campaign. And if you're Meade, this is a guy you really should watch, right? Because he's not experienced. He's not experienced in how you conduct business. So how you use your staff to communicate with people and just execute orders. And I think they're just sloppy. I think that's part of the reason why they don't relieve Geary. He claims that he didn't even know what Geary's position was. Well, of course you don't know what his position was because you didn't even try to communicate with him before he left.
Are we at a point where of all the federal commanders, he's the only non-West Pointer right now?
Yes, he is. He's the only non-West Pointer, and sometimes you could say, well, that's a real blow against him. But for example, in the Battle of Antietam, a really good commander for the Union Army there is Jacob Cox, and he's not a West Pointer.
Right. I wasn't.
No, it's true. No, I know what you mean though, because someone who's not a West Pointer, if they don't really apply themselves, they don't learn all those routine sorts of things a West Pointer is going to have inculcated in them. I'm sorry. Yeah, no, go ahead.
I was saying, I think that's just one of the things we're talking about, his disorganization and the professional soldiers, this and that. I'm like, well, Dan's not. Dan's in general because he's got a lot of money and he raised the regiment.
Politics.
He politics his way into this game and he politics his way into higher commands. And we're not taking away, like you just said, right? Like,
he's brave.
Sees the enemy, right? Faces him, does brave things, but at the end of the day, you're still very much playing this politicking game. So, when we're being critical of that, I think it's fair to point out that he's surrounded by juxtaposed professionals who use their staff correctly. And also, I think it highlights, how special, even though guys like Chamberlain have their own story, inflated so much, but like guys like him and John Brown Gordon, who are not professionals, who become professionals and things. And so, we're dealing with, Sickles, who is just, I don't know how else to describe him other than this wrecking ball of chaos. I just feel like nothing but chaos surrounds him.
Well, another thing to think about Sickles is that we today look at a West Point graduate as, wow, I mean, they're really well trained. They should be like the cream of the crop, and in the military and so on. I mean, in that era, people like Sickles, they didn't see somebody who'd gone to West Point as the cream of the crop. They didn't see somebody who'd made the military their career as the cream of the crop. They were people who couldn't make it in the outside world. Even though some of these men didn't want to make it in the outside world, they wanted to be professional soldiers, or they wanted to be engineers, or whatever. But so if you're Dan Sickles, the way you kind of assess this is, these West Pointers went in the war?
Yeah.
No.
Right.
At this point, no.
Right.
Definitively.
Right. No.
So
absolutely.
I know just as well as them. I'm a smart guy. I've made it. I mean, people talked about me being president. So
It was you, Dan. It was you talking about you being president.
I mean,
Well, that's probably true.
So I think Dan Sickles is kind of like, he's just an uber confident guy.
Yeah.
I mean, he knows what he's doing. He's smart. He can win. These West Pointers don't always know what they're doing. And I think that's going to lead to his problems with Meade. So he, make a long story short about Dan Sickles. So Meade is given his orders. He knows where he wants his troops to be. He's attending to a billion details. One of the things he does, too, I think this would be important to bring up, he instructs his chief of staff, who he really disliked, Dan Butterfield, but he couldn't get rid of him because he wanted Andrew Humphreys to be his chief of staff, but Humphreys didn't want to leave his division at this moment in time. So Meade was like, okay, I'll just keep Butterfield. Well, big mistake. So one of the things he tells Butterfield to do, which would become routine in the Army as time wore on, was, if we have to withdraw from here, I want to know all the roads, and I want to know what the plan is. So Butterfield later on is going to testify to the Committee on the Conduct of the War.
He was thinking about retreating
he wanted
already.
to retreat. And he had me drawing up orders to retreat, when the reality was, when Meade was as a commander, what he always did, he had alternative plans. Right.
I literally
Smart.
asked this question earlier in this episode of Lee. Is he thinking about an escape plan?
Yeah.
Like, not an escape, but like all contingencies that you could think of. So,
And Meade absolutely is. So this is one of the things that he's doing. He's having Butterfield look into this. He's attending to his logistics. He's dealing with all this sort of stuff, and he's expecting his corps commanders are all executing the orders. And he keeps getting these messages from Sickles. I don't really understand what my position is, and blah, blah, blah. It goes on and on. Ultimately, at one point, Sickles comes up to Army headquarters at the Leicester farm, and Meade takes him out in the yard, and he points to a little round top. He says, I want your left there. Your right connects with Hancock. So it's really, Sickles does a very successful job of disinformation, which we're all familiar with today, right?
I'm glad we're touching on this.
He does a great job of disinformation after the battle, of just flooding the zone with it, so that nobody really knows what's true and what's not true. And then he starts getting all these defenders who are like, well, maybe Sickles was right. Anyway, maybe he didn't have orders. He had orders. His orders were clear. He knew what he was supposed to do. He didn't like his orders. He looked at the ground. He didn't like the ground. He never went on Little Round Top. So he didn't really appreciate the strength of that position. And he thought the true position was the Peach Orchard area. It was open, good platform for artillery. That's where he should really be. And that's what he's going to try to lobby for. And ultimately, Meade continues to amuse him, and he sends Henry Hunt, his chief of artillery, out to go look at this line that Sickles wants to move his men to. And Hunt admits, looks at it, he goes, yeah, it's a good artillery position.
Not bad.
He says, well, I'm going to move my men out here now. And it's like, not on my authority, man. That's only comes from Meade. So ultimately, I think what Sickles does in his mind is he decides, because he asked Meade at one point, do I have the discretion to place my men as I see fit? Right? He's a lawyer. That's a loaded question. And Meade says to him, Meade, being the professional soldier, says, yes, within your orders. Right? So he's like,
reverse checkmate.
I told you what the orders. Anyway, I think what Sickles does in his mind, he's like, if I move out to the Peach Orchard, I'm still essentially meeting the spirit of my orders, right? Because I'm generally holding a line that he wanted me to hold. I'm just kind of way out in front of it, and I'm screening it. So I think he rationalizes this decision, and thinks also that Meade is too conservative and Meade is too timid, and you need some aggressive officers here. So he's just like, I'm going to force the issue. I'm going out there.
It blows my mind. Meade is on record as being aggressive. Like, we bring up Gettysburg again.
Yeah.
Like, he's aggressive.
He is very aggressive.
I want to say this about Meade before we continue, just because I've wanted to say it a few different times, and the opportunity's kind of come and gone. But, like, here's why, for you Meade haters out there, here's why I respect Meade a hell of a lot, especially over these 3 days. One, you know, you can say it about Hooker or and whatever, but, like, you know, Meade has had the benefit of growing up in this war. Like, McClellan was commander of this army at the very beginning, so the war hadn't really evolved into the war. He was there at the beginning, and Burnside kind of inherited it at this sort of still transitional, what is the war becoming? Is this becoming a war, what becomes the War of Abolition, right? You know, what the war is going to be. Like, Meade has grown up through the, not necessarily all the ranks, but sort of all the iterations of what this war is going to be and become. So he's aware of what it's going to, that's why you say, you know, he's delegating. Well, yeah, he's learned these lessons at lower levels of the army. And also, the dude inherited an army of more than 100,000 guys fighting and support people. 3 days later is conducting the largest battle that to date ever fought in the Western Hemisphere. Like, what do you want? Like, what do you think you can do a better job? Like, you know, like, I'm going to watch my language because you're on the show, but, like, you're an a-hole. Like, if you think that you can somehow armchair quarterback to a better outcome than that if you're his shoes. So, I mean, the dude is just, I mean, he's on fire, and that's why I say he keeps the job for the rest of the war. So anyway.
Really, no, it's good points. I mean, because, and it's going to come to light because when Meade finds out that Sickles has made this movement, he doesn't flip out. He's not like, you know, the old snapping turtle, like frothing at the mouth and cursing and waving his saber and hitting Sickles in the back and stuff like that. I mean, he could be like that sometimes, but when he gets out there and Sickles explains, you know, don't you see this as higher ground? Meade says to him, it is, but it gets higher until you reach the mountains. Like saying in essence to him, I know what this ground is. We control this ground with our guns over there, which you don't understand.
That's why I put you where I put you.
Right. That's where I wanted you where you were. And one of the, when we had this program we used to do the second day of the battle, which we did at the Peach Orchard, and one of the ways I concluded it is I would read this quotation from E.P. Alexander, who's the Confederate battalion commander in Longstreet's Corps. And when they ultimately take the Peach Orchard in the fighting on July 2nd, he says, I was just delighted. I was overjoyed. I thought this was just going to be fun now. And we were going to ride up, unlimber our guns, and just smash them. And he says, I got up there at the orchard, and he says, I looked, and he said, I was so disappointed because I said, I saw the enemy had an equally fine position, and he defines the position that Meade wanted Sickles in the first place, back along Cemetery Ridge. So here's an adversary identifying what Meade wanted Sickles to be in. So then, of course, the other thing that comes up is people are like, well, he acted like a breakwater. Like, well, he lost 4,200 men as that breakwater.
Yeah, great breakwater.
Well, I'm glad that you're bringing that up because that's a huge part of Sickles massaging the history. He really plays into that. We see Third Corps veterans talking about that years after the war. We have Second Corps guys complaining about the old Third Corps that gets merged into them, complaining about how the Third Corps guys won't shut up about saving the day at Gettysburg and so forth and so on. So this is something that gets established pretty early on, this whole idea of a breakwater for Longstreet's attack.
Yeah, and you also always have to be careful of, even wartime, when veterans are writing about a battle, because they always want to justify, like, particularly if your unit lost 50% of their men.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there has to be some reason why we lost 50% of our men. I mean, we had to have done something, right? So the cavalryman who fights at East Cavalry Field is like, we saved the day.
Yeah.
The soldier who fights with Sickles is like, we saved the day. So when you have to step back from that and assess all of the source material and understand the tactics of the era and the weapons of the era and the means of communications, and what you come to is you look at the position that Sickles occupied and you're like, well, A, you are beyond support distance of your closest support. And that means you are at the extreme range of much of their artillery, and you are way beyond the range of their small arms. So you're not in support distance. Secondly, you are in a salient. So if the enemy can get guns to the south of you, they're going to enfilade your line.
Pinch you to death. Yeah.
Yep.
Third, if you're forced from this position and have to retreat, what are your routes of retreat? And when you look at the routes of retreat, it's over all open ground. You're going to get mauled when you try to withdraw from there. So these were all things that I think Meade saw. And Meade was like, nobody can stay there. There's a reason why on the night of July 2nd, morning of July 3rd, Lee doesn't use the Peach Orchard as a springboard for an attack. He doesn't have any infantry there because you can't have infantry there because the Federal artillery on Cemetery Hill can command it. So that's what Meade saw. That's why Meade didn't put anybody out there and didn't form his line along the Emmetsburg Road and anchor it at the Peach Orchard. He anchored it back. My counter argument to the people who say, well, he acted as a breakwater, I'm like, well, the problem with that is the 5th Corps would have been much closer if Sickles had been where he was supposed to be. It would have been easier to reinforce him. Once he had taken this advanced position and his line was too thin to be held by one Army Corps, then they start pushing troops in all different places. And you get to the point where, when the fighting is really developed, you have a division commander, John Caldwell from the 2nd Corps, who literally is negotiating with officers on either flank to get support because there's nobody directing the battle. Sickles is not directing the battle. He's directing the 3rd Corps. But you've got 2nd Corps, 5th Corps troops down there, and nobody's directing all of them, so there's no coordination. And that's one of the advantages the Confederates are going to end up having. But this is all created by this movement of Sickles out beyond where Meade wanted him to, and then it forces the commander of the army, Meade, to react to what Sickles has done and upset his plans and has to shift his army around to try to bring support to Dan Sickles. And the other thing about Meade is that, man, he is super nice to Dan Sickles in his official report of the battle. I mean, he does not say Sickles didn't obey his orders, anything like that. He was really nice to Sickles. And he probably shouldn't have been.
I was going to say, it would have helped him out a lot later if he'd actually...
Well, I look at it like, we just have the Super Bowl, right? The quarterback's not going to yeah, but my lineman missed a block in the first quarter. They won the championship, baby. They won the battle.
That's right.
Man lost a leg.
That's
it doesn't matter.
That's right. He lost a leg.
In that moment, I guess it didn't matter. So he's like,
that's
I can
what he thought.
you, but
that's right. And you're not coming back to the Army. Why do I need to, damage you historically? We all want, we're just going to leave it. And then, of course, Sickles is going to make a thing of it.
Right. A big thing of it.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you look at the Confederate side, so how does the July 2nd evolve? Well, Lee has made his decision during the night, I'm going to fight here. And, of course, Longstreet doesn't like that plan at all. He's really opposed to that plan. And
does he make this decision, Scott, knowing that the Federal Army is having this many, these reinforcements, or is he still unaware that
he doesn't know how many they're getting? I think he knows they're going to get reinforcements. You have to presume they're going to get reinforcements. But I think his feeling is, I'm better concentrated than them. And if I move and I get moving in a timely manner, I'm going to win.
Okay.
I'm going to win. So his... the first thing he has to determine is, where am I going to attack? So when he meets with Ewell, at that point, Ewell is they're like, this is not a great position to mount a major attack from. It's really difficult ground. It's hard to get artillery positions. And then, Lee's like, well, we'll pull you all around to where Longstreet's going to be. We'll move you around on Seminary Ridge. And they're like, no, that's a bad idea, because we shouldn't give up this ground that we've already captured. And I think probably in hindsight, Lee makes a mistake and leaves them in position over there. And he sends a reconnaissance patrol out under an officer he had a lot of respect for, Captain Samuel Johnson, who was an engineer officer. And Johnson claims he got up on Little Round Top.
Oh, no, you didn't.
Now, whether he did or not, I don't think we're ever going to know. I don't think he did. if he got on Little Round Top, he didn't go very far.
I mean, pretending to be a federal officer, maybe. Were you wearing a blue
Well, there wasn't.
uniform?
When he got there, Geary may have already left, but the other problem was Buford's division was in the area still. So he could have made it up on the Bushman Hill, which is a fairly high hill, kind of southwest of Big Round Top. We don't know where exactly he got, but I think the important thing about Johnson's reconnaissance is that Johnson is convinced from the reconnaissance nobody's on Little Round Top, and when he does it, there probably isn't
There
anybody
might
there.
not have been.
I mean,
Right.
maybe he does get that exact moment where Geary's pulled off the line.
It is.
Maybe that's that moment.
It's possible. So I mean, you have to consider that it is possible that he could have done that. He wrote 3 letters about it, and he claimed in all the letters that he got up there. But who knows? You know, we're not going to know, and it's good that we don't know because we can debate about it forever.
Yeah, we have jobs. We have literal jobs forever. Thanks, guys.
Anyway, so when Johnson gets back, it's probably about 6:30 in the morning, somewhere around then, and he's going to make his report. And he said Lee asked him 3 times if he was sure Little Round Top didn't have any troops on it. And the reason he does that is because the evening before, when Lee and Longstreet were looking at Little Round Top, they saw Geary's men arriving. So he'd seen some troops there. So that's why he really presses Johnson, "You're sure?" "Okay, there's nobody on Little Round Top." "Okay, all right." Based on the map that he has, which is the Adams County map from 1858, I think, something like that, 57, 58.
Where did they get that from? They just happen to have that?
A lot of like public places would have it, so you just take
so
the map.
as soon as
And it's
you
also possible that when Jedediah Hotchkiss made his map, they also probably have the Hotchkiss map, which is a really good map. When Hotchkiss made his map, Hotchkiss probably got a copy of it. He probably sent somebody through the lines who, made their way up to Pennsylvania and got the map for him. So he can see what he wants to do.
Okay.
And the plan is we'll send Longstreet's 2 divisions around by a concealed march, and we'll get them into position at that big peach orchard, which is on the map. It's the only peach orchard in Adams County on the map.
The peach orchard.
It says the peach orchard, right? So there's the peach orchard. And the idea was the 2 divisions would move up and they would be facing northeast, not east towards Little Round Top, northeast towards Cemetery Hill, perpendicular to the Emmitsburg Road. They'll jump off, the 2 divisions, one behind the other, and they're going to hit the left flank of the Union Army, which is known to be somewhere around the Emmitsburg Road or up on Cemetery Ridge. They'll start to roll that flank up, and then Lee's going to commit Anderson's division from A.P. Hill's corps. So he's got an offensive of 20,000 men that is going to roll the Union left flank up. That's his plan. And the orders that he's going to give to Ewell are, when you hear Longstreet's guns, open a demonstration on your front. And I'm giving you the authority, if you see the opportunity to turn your demonstration into an attack, you can do so. So Ewell's like, okay, cool. All right. So they got a plan. So, I mean, the plan was based on what Lee thought the situation was, that was a good plan. It starts to break down because of a lot of factors. One of them is that Longstreet really doesn't want to execute the plan. He does not like the plan. He thinks it's a bad plan. He doesn't want to fight this battle. There's no cavalry. They don't know where the Union Army is. He just doesn't like the plan. And he dawdles the morning away. And then when Lee finally comes over to meet with him and find, what's going on? I mean, why is nothing happening? Well, I'm waiting for Law's brigade. Well, Law's brigade's 1,700 men. So, but this is the part that's disingenuous to me about this. You knew from what Lee has told you, Lee is not the sort of officer who goes, Longstreet, get moving right now. I want you to execute this mission, blah, blah, blah. He's like, it's kind of a suggestion. You know what we're doing. You know what the plan is. Right?
Discussion amongst gentlemen.
I don't need to tell you what to do. You should go do it. You're an officer. You're a professional. So at that point, it was Longstreet's duty to say, sir, I don't think I should move until I have Law's brigade. And they're 24 miles away. So can I wait for him? Right? That would be the right thing to do. But he doesn't. He waits until Lee comes over, and then Lee's like, what's going on? I'm waiting for Law's brigade. Okay, so they wait for Law's brigade, and then comes the real debacle. Captain Johnson comes on the scene again, and both Lafayette McLaws and Longstreet say Captain Johnson was the guide. Captain Johnson, in his letters that he writes after the war, says, I was told by General Lee to accompany Longstreet's column, kind of be a consultant, right? So you read that and you're like, okay, Johnson's lying, or Longstreet and McLaws are not telling the truth, or somebody's, and I'm like, you know what? Consider this option. They're all telling the truth, which I think is entirely plausible.
They think he's the guide. He thinks he's accompanying them, and nobody's...
Because Lee
nobody's
told them
leading
different
anybody.
things.
Right.
Some language you use is so crucial. So if you say to McLaws and Longstreet, I'll provide you a guide. Guide your column. It's going to be this engineer on my staff. Great. Okay. You tell Captain Johnson, Captain, I want you to accompany Longstreet's column.
Right.
Captain Johnson goes, oh, good. He's got a guide. Somebody else is guiding the column. He doesn't ask the question or whatever. And then pretty soon they're just all riding along. And now somebody can go, oh, no, something like that would never happen. I'm like, oh, really?
People are people. It would happen all the
You
time.
need to study military history, because those sorts of blunders, communication blunders, happen all the time in warfare, all the time. Even with the days, we've got, all sorts of, modern communications. So I think it's possible. We don't know it. Again, I want to stress that. We don't know. I think it's possible, though, that Lee says one thing and uses certain language to Johnson, and he says another thing and uses certain language to McLaws and Longstreet. But this, again, I say, okay, forget all the, chafe that is out there. Where is Longstreet when he marches his men?
Right.
In the middle of his column. So where's Reynolds on July the 1st when they make contact?
He's at the front of his column.
He's at the front.
Lead from the front.
Right. Well, also know when you should be there. You don't always have to be there. Sometimes you shouldn't be there, but know when you should be there, because then if you're at the front in the means communications in that era, you can react to what's going on. So Longstreet is riding with Hood. He's in the middle of the column. And Johnson is riding with McLaws towards the front of McLaws's column. And of course, as they go marching along, they reach the point where they're going to, I just forgot the name of the hill, but they come to this point where the road goes up and over this hill. And Johnson kind of offhandedly, he mentions to McLaws, if you keep going up that way, you can be seen by that little round top. And there's a signal station. They knew there was a signal station now because they saw the signal flags there. Right. Everybody's like, So everybody goes riding their horses up there. They get up on top of the hill. And then, some choice expletives are uttered by McLaws and the others. They're like,
sure.
Dang, he's right. We can't go this way. So then they ride back, and then you have to waste time. You have to go all the way back, find Longstreet, explain to Longstreet, hey, we got a problem here. Then Longstreet's got to ride up. This is not something that happens, like we're not driving a Ferrari up here, right? These guys are riding their horses around.
Right.
So this all takes time. And then we decide, we have to turn around and march by a different route. Now, the artillery reserve of Longstreet's corps, under E.P. Alexander, who was a remarkably good officer and smart, he just took his batteries down through the fields and cut around the hill and found the road and kept going. Right? Which maybe some of the ambulances and ammunition wagons and stuff like that, maybe they wouldn't have been able to do that. I don't know. But Longstreet ends up turning his entire column around. And then rather than making Hood the lead in the march, because McLaws had been specifically told by Lee to lead the attack, right? So McLaws wants to lead the attack. Because again, McLaws, even though I think McLaws was one of the best performers in the Army of Northern Virginia in the Maryland campaign, he did not have a good day at Salem Church at the Chancellorsville campaign.
Right.
And Meade, or Lee, I keep saying Meade, Lee, for some reason, Lee did not like McLaws, and he didn't really trust him. He never understood what he did in the Maryland campaign. Never really gave him credit for that.
Doesn't seem to trust him in the Maryland campaign very much.
He doesn't.
Either.
He doesn't. But he saves Lee's bacon a couple of times in the campaign, and he's a really decisive commander. He's a really good commander. He's a really good administrator as well. His division's always in very good condition. So, I think McLaws is feeling like, the boss, the big boss, I don't know, really trust me. I want to lead this attack. I want to be at the front. Okay, so now I got to waste all this time and let McLaw's division take the lead, find a different route. So they waste all this time to find another route to get around the hill so they can't be seen and get up into position. And then they just continue to compile mistake on mistake, because then when McLaws is marching up towards Seminary or Warfield Ridge, Longstreet asks him how he's going to go in. And by this point, what do you know if you're McLaws? There might be like a little token force at the Peach Orchard, but there's nothing I have to worry about. I can just steamroll over those guys, take position. We'll form perpendicular to the Emmitsburg Road, and we're going to execute the attack. Good. All right. Good. Cool. Everything's cool.
Nobody on Little Round.
Longstreet goes riding away, and then McLaws gets up onto Warfield Ridge, and lo and behold, everybody's telling him, like, uh-oh. It's not what we thought it was. And when he gets up there, it's crawling with federal troops, artillery, everything like that. And then he realizes, we're going to have to fight to get there. We're going to have a fight. So he starts deploying his division, trying to bring his artillery up. During this period, he gets 3 orders from Longstreet, all more urgent. Why aren't you moving? Get moving. Attack at once. And finally, the last one he gets, he's really aggravated by this. He is, by the end of this battle, he's seething about Longstreet. Because the thing is, these guys don't have a long working relationship together. McLaws was at Chancellorsville, Longstreet wasn't there. He served under Longstreet at Fredericksburg. That's pretty much it.
No, Longstreet's at Second Manassas, though. So it's not.
But he's not. McLaws isn't under his command.
Oh,
then,
McLaws.
right.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I thought you went further Lee, and I was like, these guys have to know each other.
No, sorry.
Sorry.
So
you're right.
McLaws is so this is kind of his first really big battle with Longstreet, and boy, it's not going well. And Longstreet is surly, and he's sulking, and he's sending these ridiculous orders to McLaws, irregardless of the situation that McLaws is confronting. And then finally, he rides up. Somebody's convinced Longstreet, boss, there's a lot of Yankees up there. So he gets up there and he tells McLaws, okay, hold right now. I'm going to put Hood in on your right. So this is the first move that Longstreet's going to make. That's a really smart move. So, okay, they're in front of us. They've extended our lines farther south than we thought. I'm going to outflank them. So I'm going to put Hood's division in on the right. And contrary again to another one of the myths of Gettysburg is that Lee ordered an echelon attack, meaning you start from the far right, and then you work your way up to the left, and each brigade jumps off as the brigade next to them jumps off. That was not the plan at all. There was no plan for that. The original plan was McLaws and Hood, one behind the other, would attack up the Emmitsburg Road. That was the original plan. So now what Longstreet has done is a variation. I'll put Hood in position. Hood's entire division will attack. When they attack, they'll engage the Federals on their far left, and that will draw strength away from McLaws's front. When I think that's accomplished its mission, Hood, I'll send McLaws in. And then we know Anderson's sitting over here. He's waiting. When McLaws goes in, Anderson's going to start to go in. And now Anderson is going to independently make a decision to send his brigades in echelon. That was not a decision. And Longstreet is going to send McLaws's division kind of in echelon, but that wasn't like a part of the original plan. He does that just because of the way the battle is developing. So they see Sickles in position. Longstreet makes these modifications to the plan. I think the modifications he makes are really good. His plan is good. The execution ends up, for the most part, being really good. And we have problems. Of course, Hood's division attacks about 4 in the afternoon after about a half-hour artillery bombardment. And it's a wicked artillery duel. A.P. Alexander said, he was told when he took command of S.D. Lee's battalion after Sharpsburg, S.D. Lee told him, he says, pray you never see another Sharpsburg, because he said that was artillery hell. And Alexander writes afterwards, he says, Antietam was nothing compared to Gettysburg. He said that was the bloodiest artillery fighting I ever saw in the war.
Is Alexander at
No.
Antietam?
He's the chief of ordnance of the
You
army.
came in hot right there, man.
He's got a bunch of quotes about Antietam where he wasn't involved in the actual fighting, though. That's my beef with Alexander.
Okay.
Yeah, he's a really good analyst because he's honest. That's the thing I like about Alexander. He's not like lost cause-y Confederate.
Matt, you want to challenge him to a cage match? I mean, he came in real hot. We have the belt. You can defend. You can put the title on the line tonight.
I like Alexander for those reasons.
Yeah.
He writes excellently after the war,
Yeah.
but he does have some comments in regards to the Maryland campaign that I don't think are accurate because he's not involved in fighting.
Yeah, you have to. I mean, you always have to take those things into consideration. You know, were they actually there and they knew the decisions that were made, or in that respect, Alexander is a well-informed historian.
Sure.
He was also a soldier, but he's a historian.
Listen, what are his sources, right?
Yeah,
He'll
right.
cite his
Right.
work. Bastard.
Anyway, I mean, so Hood goes in. He gets wounded almost immediately. So there's a little lapse in the command and control in his division. His division fights really well. It's a really good division. It's a really good division. And they fight really, really well. It's a hard fight. And, of course, it's going to lead to the drama on Little Round Top because the right wing of Hood's division, which is Law's brigade, its far right regiments are going to go right up Big Round Top. And the reason they're going to end up going up Big Round, they weren't supposed to. And again, this is all the sorts of stuff that happens in a battle because the Union sharpshooters, I forget what was the first of the time, this is the second U.S. sharpshooters down there, they were harassing Law's brigade as it was coming across the fields of the Bushman and Slider farm. And when they get down near Plum Run, one of the sharpshooters shoots the 15th Alabama's lieutenant colonel in the knee. He's going to lose his leg as a result from that. And the colonel, Oates, decides, there's no way I'm leaving those guys in my rear. So I've got orders to go up the valley towards Devil's Den. I'm not doing that. So he orders his regiment to go up the hill, and the regiments to his left align on his movement. So the 4th Alabama, the 47th Alabama, they're going to move up the hill with him. And that's what draws the Confederate movement up that way. And then the two far right regiments of Law's brigade, the 44th and 48th Alabama, they get ordered to move from the far right, and they go to attack Devil's Den. And then the 4th and 5th Texas go by them. And everybody's mixed up,
It's
right?
Springfield, Virginia. It's a mixing bowl. Which highway are you on?
So everybody's mixed up at this point, but of course this is what's going to bring on the drama at Little Round Top. Right. So we can talk about that.
Yeah, so Hood is that the grievous wound that he takes and almost takes his life there. Like that's like right away into the
Very,
fight?
very early. It's in the orchard of the Bushman farm, which the orchard's been restored, so you can see right where he was. Nice. It was probably a battery that was around the peach orchard that fired the shell that got him. But yeah, really early on in the attack, he goes down.
It's always interesting that Hood gets so much credit in this instance, and he deserves. We're big about people getting credit on the battlefield, regardless of our personal feelings. But you think the way we talk about Hood here, you would think he commanded the entire fight. You think he was there, but he's not.
Yeah,
he's relatively soon to be out of it.
Yeah, he's taken it out of it pretty quickly. He didn't want to make the attack where they were going. He looked at the ground and
he wanted to go to the right.
Yeah, he wanted to go to the right. The thing was, I mean, the time of day it was, the length of time, they didn't know the roads, they didn't have any scouts they didn't have any cavalry. I think Longstreet made the right call there, that you couldn't keep making this movement go farther and farther to the right, and it might not even worked anyway if he'd done that. So he they go in, and of course Little Round Top is undefended at that point. There's nobody up on the hill except for a signal station crew. And
Gouverneur K. Warren going,
Gouverneur K. Warren. He's
oh crap.
He's the chief engineer of the Army, and he's sent to look at Sickles' line by Meade. And this is after Meade had gone out, met with Sickles, and he told Sickles that he would move the 5th Corps to his support, and Sickles could call on the 2nd Corps for help if he needed it. Meade leaves, rides back, gets Warren. Warren, go down and look at Sickles' line, make any recommendations you need to. Warren goes riding down there, and he's like any tourist. You look up like, I want to go up there.
Yeah.
You get a good view. So he goes up there. He gets up on the hill. The attack hasn't opened yet when he gets up on the hill. I don't even know if the artillery has opened fire yet. And there's two stories that emerge from Warren. The Warren-centric story and the Signal Corps story.
Oh.
The Warren-centric story is that he gets up there and he sends a staff officer down to Captain James Smith's battery, which is near Devil's Den. And he tells Smith to fire a shot out towards Warfield Ridge. And when he does, all these Confederate soldiers who are out there turn and they watch the shell go over their head. And Warren sees the glinting of the rifles and suddenly realizes we're outflanked, we're screwed, we got to get guys up here. And he's the hero of the hour, he takes the action. The Signal Corps history, which I actually believe, I think this story is true, although parts of it I think are apocryphal. But the one part that I believe is that this was their job, was to look for people moving around at a long distance.
Right.
And they were like, sir, there is a lot of Rebs out there.
Yeah.
And Warren, they were like, he couldn't see them. He could not see them. They're like, sir, they're out there. But he kept trying to convince him.
No, only he could see them. Nobody else.
So then in the Signal Corps history, they say the Confederates, their artillery opened fired, and they fired a shell that burst near the signal station, and a fragment from the shell nicked Warren in the neck. And this is a great story. I don't think this part is true, but in the story, the lieutenant at the signal station says to General Warren, "Do you see them now, sir?" It's a great story.
You're fired.
I don't think he said it that way. Anyway, I think that's probably the truth of the story. Is the Signal Corps men convinced him, we're outflanked, there's a lot of men out there. Warren did probably see them. And then Warren takes action. He sends a staff officer to Sickles, and he's going to send someone to Sykes. And the guy goes to Sickles. Sickles says, I don't have a man to spare. So, again, his appreciation of the terrain is tremendous.
I got myself into a problem you might have seen. I cannot be troubled with your troubles.
And when he goes to Sykes, Sykes says, I'll detach a brigade immediately. And then Sykes sends a staff officer down into the valley, Plum Run Valley, beyond Plum Run Valley to the wheat field, because General James Barnes' division of the 5th Corps has arrived from the right flank of the army. They've marched over, and they are standing in column in the wheat field. They've halted because Barnes rode ahead to consult with some 3rd Corps officers and see where he should put his division and what the lay of the ground was. So while Barnes is up there doing that, they're all just standing there in the field. And the staff officer comes riding along.
Great.
He comes riding along the column, and then the commander of, I think it was his 3rd Brigade, Strong Vincent, was a colonel.
The real hero.
He's one of them. He's definitely one of them.
For sure, but I want to just say that clearly.
For some reason, he stops the staff officer. We don't know why. I mean, there was something that attracted him. He says, what are your orders? And maybe he's just curious, because he could tell the guy was carrying orders. And he says he was looking for General Barnes. He says, well, what are your orders? And he says, well, General Barnes is supposed to send a brigade to Yonder Hill. Points to the little round top. And Vincent, he'll forever be remembered for this, because he doesn't go, okay, go find General Barnes and go through the chain of command. He says, tell General Barnes, I'll take my brigade there at once, because I think he recognizes that hill's important. This is an emergency. We don't have time to wait on protocol. I'm going.
We're going to lose this initiative if we don't move right now.
Just tell General Barnes I'm doing it. So he leaves, and the other thing that Vincent does that's really smart is he leaves his brigade in command of his senior colonel, and he rides ahead with his orderly to look at the ground so that he knows where he wants to put his regiments when they get there, rather than riding with his men and getting up there and then figuring that out. He goes up there. So he looks over the ground. He knows exactly where he wants to place his men. I also think he shows a really good appreciation of infantry tactics, of how he places his men. So he anchors his flanks on these two ledges on the hill, or spurs. So the 16th Michigan on the one, the 20th Maine on the other. He doesn't deploy at the top of the hill. He deploys halfway down the hill. So the enemy can't maneuver around him easily to outflank him. They have to fight him.
Right.
And when they fight him, they'll push him uphill. So he'll be fighting uphill, making it hard for the enemy. I think all of the decisions he makes are really, really smart. The orders that he gives the Chamberlain and the 20th Maine are the appropriate orders. He's basically telling this colonel, who's pretty inexperienced, you don't retreat. There's going to be no order to retreat. So the only reason you fall back is you're driven off the field.
You're dead.
Right, or you're dead. You don't retreat. So he gives some staying power to them. He himself is going to go towards his right because I think, rightfully so, he expected that would be the spot that the main blow was going to come because that's where he knew the Third Corps was down there. He believed some Confederates were coming up in that direction, and that was where the first Confederate attack hit him, was on his right. That's the 4th and 5th Texas and the 4th Alabama. They come out, they hit his right flank. Really hard fight. And then as the 47th Alabama comes down off the hill, then they become engaged, and then the battle starts to spread. 20th Maine does become engaged at that point, at least the right of it does. And then the 15th Alabama, the biggest regiment in Law's brigade, comes down the hill. And then you got a problem, because then they're going to, they have enough men that they can outflank the 20th Maine. And Chamberlain, he deserves, I think, all the accolades he gets because he does everything right in the battle. I mean, he keeps his cool when a lot of people would lose it because the maneuver that they execute, which is the
wheel charge,
bend their left flank back. So put the left 4 companies, refused, and thin the right 5 companies, because one company, remember, is behind a stone wall, a ways away from them. Mm-hmm. Thin the other 5 companies out to the length of the entire regimental line, original regimental line. Think about how tough that is under fire. Right. That's really difficult. He executes that movement. It's a wicked fight, seesaw back and forth. I mean, Oates at one point is using his pistol. And then he tells a story in his account of, he said, the Maine men charged me at one point. And we know exactly where this occurred because he describes this boulder. And we call it today the Oates boulder on the battlefield. It looks like a herd of elephants has trampled the ground around it. Around town, because so many people have gone down and looked at it. Sure. But the color bearer of the regiment was right next to this boulder. And he said this Maine soldier rushed towards the color bearer and tried to grab at the flag. And he said the color bearer stepped back, and Sergeant Pat O'Connor, this Irishman in his regiment, took his rifle with the bayonet fixed and drove the bayonet through the head of the 20th Maine soldier. And Oates tells that story. He says, that was something like, I never forgot it. And I always found that interesting when I would talk to visitors up there about memory, is of all the things that Oates sees, of all these different things, that he never forgot that because it was so unique.
I mean, that was an incredibly intimate and horrible thing.
Right. Just a horrible thing. And he just never forgot it. It just stuck with him. So it tells you something also about the nature of the fight. And one time I had this group of students from Stanford, and I did this little experiment with them that worked really, really well. So I showed them how you would load and fire a Civil War rifle. And then we'd pantomime it. We'd go through it, right? So I'm like, okay. So now I'm taking half the students, and I'm going to be the 15th Alabama. And you are the 20th Maine. So we're going to come up the hill like they did, and you're going to fire at us, and then you got to reload. Well, when they did that, they all started to fall back. So the battle goes like this. So the battle sways back and forth because everybody's got to reload all the time. When you reload, a lot of times you fall back a little ways.
Yeah.
Or you get some cover so you can reload, and the other guys come towards you because now they've got a loaded weapon. So it helped them see, and you can kind of see how the battle seesaws back and forth.
I'm here right now, and I understand how these weapons work. I have a bunch of them on the other side of that wall. So yeah, okay.
So anyway, the right companies of the regiment had done an awful lot of firing. They'd done more firing than anybody else, and some of those company commanders started telling Chamberlain they were almost out of ammunition. Somebody, maybe more than one company commander, suggested to Chamberlain that they should fall back because they could hear shooting behind them. And of course, that was pressure being applied on the 16th Michigan on the right, and it sounded like it was right behind them. And again, you can understand why people think this. We don't know where we are. We've never been here before.
Right.
We're in the woods. Shooting's behind us. Boss, we got to get out of here, man. We got to fall back, regroup, figure out where we are. So you've got all these different things. And then he has Holman Melcher, who was the commander of the Color Company, who was a really, really good officer. And Melcher, some of his men from his company were lying out in front of his company wounded. And they were apparently shouting to the men in the company to get them, to move forward so they could get them, and because they were going to get shot, because they're in between the lines. And so Holman Melcher's asking permission if he can advance his company. So if you're Chamberlain, you got all these things coming at you, right? All these different things. And he's decisive, right? He's decisive at this moment when the stuff has hit the fan. He makes a decision. And he's like, return to your company. I'm about to order a charge.
They're like, can you repeat that, please?
And
what?
he says, Chamberlain's account is that, we get all this hocus pocus that, in the movie again. I love some of the scenes in the movie, but I was even in the movie. I was in the 20th Maine when they filmed the bayonet charge that one day. But anyway, Chamberlain gets all of his company commanders and he's like charting out exactly what they're going to do. That could never happen. Never. It could never happen.
Or the part where he thinks in his mind about rhetoric for 25 minutes while the battle's happening all around him. Like,
yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have time. You have to trust that your men are trained. They know what they're going to do. And what Chamberlain says in his accounts, he wrote a lot of things about this. He said, he shouted, bayonet. He said, the moment he shouted that, he said, the men started yelling so loudly, they never even heard me say charge. He said, bayonet, charge. Ellis Spear, who's the captain acting as major commanding the left wing of the regiment, said he didn't even know what was going on. He hears this shout. Guys start jumping down, running down the hill. He's like, advance, go. And the other thing that's really bizarre about the 20th Maine movement is we've become conditioned, because we've seen the movie, we've read The Killer Angels, and lots of historians have repeated this, is it's a swinging door. So the left wing swings around, and the whole 20th Maine sweeps up on Big Round Top and outflanks the Confederates, or drives the Confederates off the field, captures all these prisoners. That's not really what happened. The left wing...
You're about to crush some dreams here, Scott. Calm down.
The left wing of the 20th Maine went straight. So they go east. And why did they go east? Because the Confederate soldiers of the 15th Alabama there, they get an order to retreat at about the same time Chamberlain orders the charge. Because Oates had reached the point, his brother had been mortally wounded, his best captain had been killed, his guys were exhausted.
And they had no water.
And he was exhausted. He's exhausted too. So he orders a retreat. And again, I always like to get into the details of how do you order a retreat? Do you stand up and shout, retreat,
like they do in the movie?
Can anybody hear you?
Right.
No way. There's just no way. People are going to hear that. They can't hear it. You're going to send maybe, your sergeant major or maybe your adjutant to try and go around and get to the company commanders and tell them, hey, I'm giving some type of signal. Maybe it was a bugle call. I don't know that it had a bugle. They never mentioned that. But some type of signal. When you hear that, get out of here and go back the way we came. So you're a soldier in the 15th Alabama on the far right of the regiment. You're fighting. You're disoriented. Retreat! Retreat! You turn around, you go to the rear. When you turn around and go to the rear, if you're on the far right of the 15th Alabama, you go east.
Oh.
You're going towards the Taneytown Road.
Yeah.
Because Spear writes, they rush down there and they capture all these prisoners down in that area. Because that's the way some of the Confederate soldiers went. They went the wrong way. And so Spear's guys go straight east. The rest of the 20th Maine sweeps down the hill and does do kind of a wheel because they're pursuing the Confederates up Big Round Top. So if you're Chamberlain, when you sit down to write your report, how do you write your report? How do you articulate what just happened?
I designed it.
It's chaos.
All of it.
So I think you try to make it understandable. I executed a right wheel. I didn't order a right wheel. We executed a right wheel in our movement. a military man reading that report would understand, oh, I get how you moved. I understand the movement that you made. And I also get that you didn't order that movement. You didn't say right wheel forward. It just happened. So everything that happens in the 20th Maine happens, but not exactly the way we want to think it happened, right? It's messier. It's more confused. It's more chaotic than I think the way we want it to be. A really good book that I always enjoyed on the 20th Maine is Tom Desjardins did Stand Firm, Ye Boys from Maine.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
That's a really good, honest look at the 20th Maine and all of the, the wheat and chaff that kind of floats around that whole story afterwards. But also, so the 20th Maine, I think, deserves a lot of accolades, but at the same time, on the right flank, the 16th Michigan, through some confusion over there, start to give ground. Strong Vincent jumps up on a boulder. He's trying to rally the guys to get them to hold their position. He gets plugged and mortally wounded.
So that was when you take a riding crop to a fight, but
Yeah, right. So he's moved from the fight, and then again, Warren rears his head in this battle because Warren, for some reason, claims he didn't know that Vincent was even there.
no.
I don't know
I
how.
find that hard to believe.
Yeah.
I find that hard to believe that. The other thing you always have to take into consideration is sometimes these guys, when they're trying to remember these things from some years afterwards, are like, I don't remember them up there. But if you took them back to the day, they'd be like, oh, yeah, that's right.
See, I want to touch on that because
Yeah.
a lot of what we take away from like the American Civil War or even other wars we study are reminiscences that were written so much later or further after the fact. And a lot of these guys are writing them later in life, trying to square themselves and their legacies, and that coincides or ties into another thing that I wanted to mention again earlier. It's been a theme in this episode once or twice, and in other episodes, and in other military affairs like the First World War. Nobody writes, my unit got absolutely friggin' rolled. They write, my unit held to the last, never ceding ground.
Right.
Everything is written that way.
Right.
And when you add what Chamberlain really writes about himself, like 30 years later or something like that, like you add a lot of time,
Right.
man, that gets so much more inflated. Like, of course I never did that. I was only awesome.
Right.
And I'm glad you're touching on that, Pat, because Chamberlain lives a long time.
Yeah.
I mean, he eventually dies from the wound he receives in the war, at around Petersburg, but he lives a long time. He's like 88 when he passes.
And he almost sees the First World War. He
almost.
misses it by a year.
Yeah. And he writes a lot. He writes so well.
And so well.
He really promotes not just the a lot the 20th Maine, but also all the fighting that's occurring on that end of the line. How important that end of the line is, and yet that part of the story still begins to slip away. Obviously, the Pickett's Charge Field in Day 3 takes a lot of the focus, especially during the reunions. It tends to be a lot of the focus. And so it's not until we get things like Killer Angels and then later the film when the 20th Maine story is really brought front and center for the novel, for the film. And I think when we had lunch a few months back, or last fall, I should say, we were talking about this a little bit, and you'd mentioned that, what is it, Company B's monument there on Little Round Top wasn't even known to most visitors, wasn't something that was visited to most visitors until these... Till Killer Angels, till Gettysburg, especially Gettysburg.
Yeah. I mean, when I first started at Gettysburg in the summer of 1979, the Park Service had put up a little 20th Maine sign off of Sykes Avenue over Little Round Top that said 20th Maine Monument because people didn't know where it was.
Right.
Because it was all overgrown. The Killer Angels comes out, and people went bananas over that. And then the movie comes out, and they go even more bananas over it. And then it looked like the Serengeti Plain, once everybody started making their way down there. Now, I mean, you can go to the 20th Maine Monument, and if you walk down from that monument, again, there's like another, water buffalo path to the Company B marker, which 20 years ago even, people kind of had to look for that. I mean, you had to direct them to the stone wall, and then they'd walk along the wall, and then eventually they'd find the company B marker, and it was a really neat discovery for them. But now it's so many people have found it that that's part of the reason why Little Round Top's closed right now, and they're doing all the work up there.
Right, exactly.
It's been loved to death. I mean, so many people have been up there. You kind of have to do something to harden some of these paths.
I'll be honest with you. There is a huge part of me that is loving the rage and conniption fits I'm watching people have. I'm like, dude, all of you are nuts. Like, this needs to be done.
You're right.
Yeah.
If you want to visit this for the rest of your life,
You have to, yeah.
And your rage, I love it. Oh,
Yeah,
I love it.
you do. You have to. I mean, I don't like the fact that it's closed, but you have to do
Sure.
something. You had
Either.
you had to do something about it. I mean, I remember the last time I was on a Little Round Top with a group at the 20th Main position. I was like, crap, there's hardly even any little rocks left.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's bad.
it's so eroded. It's killing all the trees in the area as well because there's so much compaction of the people all being in there all the time. You have to come up with a way that you can have some surfaces that people could stand on to view the areas and not destroy them. I mean, I went to the Little Bighorn, and one of the things I really wanted to do when I got there was go into the deep coulee where two of his companies got wiped out. And when I got there, there was a sign up that said the deep coulee is under rehabilitation and it's closed for 2 years.
Oh, wow.
And when I saw that, I was like,
Damn.
well, part of me is disappointed, but the other part of me is glad the National Park Service is making sure that if I come back here 20 years later, there's still a deep coulee.
Right.
And you have to do those things. So you have to sometimes, it just is the one time you happen to be there, well, that's...
Yeah. Well, before we get back on
bad
track,
luck.
that's because we live in such an instant coffee society
Yeah,
now that
yeah.
like people don't have the concept of like we need to work on things to keep them for down the road. And like right around the corner from this very studio, there is a bridge that I love taking off of a road just to it connects me to getting into Westminster a lot quicker. The bridge has when it is open again will have been closed for over a year.
Yeah.
It takes a drive for me and it takes about 8 minutes off of a drive.
Right.
I'm losing my mind, but it needs to be done because the bridge was literally about to collapse. Like the work needs to be done.
Yeah.
I can handle a year for 50 more years of a bridge.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Yeah.
Burnside Bridge was closed for 2 years.
That's right.
People
Visit
lost
Cults
their
Hill, goddammit.
Yeah.
Like there's other parts of the battlefield.
Yeah, it's very true. I mean, it's so it is. It's absolutely necessary. But I mean, getting back to the story, you've got Warren. I'm sure he knew that Vincent was up there. He may have known also that Vincent was in some trouble. He rides down off Little Round Top, personally rides down, and gets down to the Wheatfield Road, and he sees a brigade halted along the road in column. And this is one of the advantages the Union Army has, where they have officers who've served in the line and in the staff, because what that does is they get known everywhere. So as he goes riding down, he sees an officer he recognizes, and it's Patrick O'Rourke, the colonel of the 140th New York.
Yep.
So he knows O'Rourke, right? So he appeals to O'Rourke to come up on the hill. He knows that, I mean, he's a professional soldier. He knows he's supposed to go through his brigade commander, but he also feels he doesn't have time to do that, and he'll take the responsibility. So O'Rourke is like Vincent. I mean, this is the one thing about the Union Army in this day, which is not really characteristic of the Army, I think in some of the battles they fight, is all of these officers showing real initiative and doing whatever needs to be done to try to win this battle. It's not to say the Confederates don't do that, but the Union does it at all the places they really have to do it. And so O'Rourke says, yeah, I'll bring my men up there. He rushes up the hill. He's got a big regiment. I think it was close to 600 men, 500, 600 men. He gets up there on the hill. He leads his men down.
He's out front.
He's out front. He leads his men down to where the Texans are, 4th and 5th Texas.
Like a theme for people out front.
Yeah, and they pick him off.
Yeah.
Gets shot through the neck and is dead as a doornail immediately. But his men, with all these numbers, come in, and the Texans are like, we're not going to take this hill. And everybody starts to pull back. And then they're going to bring up the rest of Stephen Weed's brigade, and you're going to have the hill. Now you got the hill. Now you got a good, firm hold on the hill. You have 2 brigades on the hill. And, so then in the historiography and the memory of it, we always try and give all the credit to one person.
Oh, sure.
And, I mean, it's a lot of people. It's it's Vincent, it's Warren, it's the signalman on the hill,
Rourke, yeah.
it's Chamberlain, it's O'Rourke, it's the colonels of the 44th New York and the 83rd Pennsylvania. Colonel Welch of the 16th Michigan didn't have a great day, but I mean, it's also the men. I mean, the soldiers who do the fighting. It's the guys like Holman Melcher and Ellis Spear and others. I mean, they're all an integral part of it. And but the theme is all of these people showing initiative, taking a risk, and not waiting on going through the protocol, which would have cost the Union Army. So they've secured Little Round Top. Meanwhile, Hood and then Longstreet starts to feed McLaws into the fight. I mean, they're just hammering Sickles' line. And then ultimately, Longstreet's tactics work. They work. They launch an attack with Barksdale, supported by Wofford's brigades, and they break the Federal line at the Peach Orchard and the Sherfy Farm. And then when they break that, Barksdale wheels his brigade to the north to roll up the Union line in that direction, and Wofford goes straight down the Wheatfield Road. So Barksdale goes northeast, Wofford goes east. And what's going to happen with Wofford is going to advance down towards the Wheatfield. And the fighting in the Wheatfield, this confused melee that's going on in the whole battle with no real commander, the Second Corps had sent Caldwell's division down to reinforce the Third Corps. And the situation in the Wheatfield was deteriorating, and they needed help there because Barnes' division of the Fifth Corps had retreated, de Trobriand's brigade of the Third Corps was retreating, so they send Caldwell's division in there. Caldwell launches just a ferocious counterattack, right? Bam, slams into the Confederates, pushes the Confederates all the way back up to Rose Hill, secures a Stony Hill, secures Rose Woods on his left flank. So he does really well, right? Does really well. But he's got no help. He doesn't know who's in command. So he starts riding around trying to coordinate, negotiate with commanders to get some support. And long story short, again, Wofford comes in on the flank of these guys. And then it's just a debacle. And the whole 1st Division, which was one of the best divisions in the Army of the Potomac, leaves the field, as a staff officer in the Second Corps said, without a particle of organization. I mean, they are just destroyed and dispersed and have to run for their lives. They lose a lot of prisoners. They take a lot of casualties. It's a big debacle. Caldwell was furious about what happened to his division. He gets a lot of blame for what happened to his division, but it wasn't his fault. I mean, he tried the best he could to try to get help. So now the whole line's collapsed,
Right.
And then the Confederates push down into Plum Run Valley again and actually start to threaten Little Round Top from the west. But by this point, you got 2 brigades in Little Round Top, and then the 6th Corps has started to reach the field after their big long march, and they start to feed some of the brigades into the fight. And the Confederates realize that they're too disorganized. There's too many Yankees. They just seem to be coming out of the woodwork. That's one of the reoccurring themes from the Confederates. Is like, holy Toledo, where did all these guys come from?
Keep coming from?
But what they're encountering is an army with a commander that's putting everybody he has into the fight. So he is putting his troops where they need to be in the battle, not like Hooker or McClellan or Pope or others who don't put all of their men in where they need to be. And it takes the steam out of the attack. To the north, Barksdale does really, really well. He overruns infantry, artillery, and he's pushing on towards the center of the Union line south of where the Pennsylvania Monument is today. But again, what he's going to encounter is Meade is constantly shifting troops, and the Second Corps has stripped more troops from the northern end of Cemetery Ridge. So they send a whole brigade, Willard's brigade, to the south, and then Willard counterattacks. Then part of Harrow's brigade, the 1st Minnesota, counterattacks. And meanwhile, Anderson's division has come into the battle now at this point. So you got all this pressure on the Federal line, and it's touch and go. Boy, that part of the battle and the second day often gets overlooked as you go up Cemetery Ridge, but it is touch and go because they sent so many troops to the south. They were really thin in the center. But again, it's another case of sacrifice. So the 1st Minnesota sacrifices itself, takes tremendous losses. Willard's brigade launches a ferocious counterattack. And they mortally wound Barksdale. They drive Barksdale's brigade back. They advanced almost all the way up to the Emmitsburg Road.
Wow.
But they came under Confederate artillery fire, pretty severe fire, and then they fell back. And then that fire ends up killing Willard. He gets hit in the head by a shell. No, it was bad.
That'll do it.
Right in front of his brigade. It was really horrific.
Oh, it's the scene in the beginning of Glory.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and then
I saw you in the Antietam video, by the way, and Glory all like within a week of each other when I was a kid. So I was like, oh, what a story. Jesus! Like, it was hard to be
That's tough. That's tough. Yeah, but anyway, Anderson's division carried the attack north, and Wright's brigade, the final brigade of Anderson's that really gets into the attack, because this attack eventually broke down. Wright's brigade penetrates the Union line south of the Angle. We have some in the Park Library. We have some really good letters from some guys in Wordy's battery, and they make it clear how far Wright's men got. They displaced all the way back to the Humbledall farm, which is right next to the park maintenance facility. So Wright's men, now there's also some cockamamie theories that Wright's men overran Cushing's battery and Arnold's battery. That's all nonsense. There was a gap in the Union line. They got right through the gap, two of Wright's regiments on the right flank. And Wordy was really the only thing in front of them. And Wordy kept just displacing and firing at him and then displacing. And then finally some 1st Corps troops came down from Cemetery Hill. 12th Corps troops came over from Culp's Hill. And then they start driving the Rebs back and they start to restore the line. But, man, it's a really hard-fought fight, and it's a close-run thing. And what saves the bacon of the Union Army is the sacrifices of people like the 1st Minnesota, the 9th Massachusetts Battery, Willard's counterattack, and there's lots of others that I'm leaving out of it who make enormous sacrifices. And it's Meade shifting his troops and putting them in where they're needed.
Malfunction.
I had somebody wrote me, I'd written something on Facebook, I was working on the Sunken Lane chapters, and they're like, oh, well, I hope you're going to set everybody straight about General Caldwell down at Antietam. People are saying that he didn't, and I said, no, I'm not going to set anybody straight. I said, General Caldwell was a man. He was a human being. He could have bad days and good days. Yeah. And the evidence is strong he had a bad day at Antietam. Yeah. And the evidence is strong that he had a good day at Gettysburg. And he can be both. I mean, it's like, hello? I mean, they're not all one thing.
Right.
They don't always have to be one thing.
Well, since you're writing currently about Maryland campaign, and like one of the things Matt and I really like to do is focus on all the shots we take at McClellan that he deservedly gets. Like, we don't give him enough credit for actually getting this army ready to move and moving into the Loudon Valley.
Right, absolutely.
And that is something like Matt and I are like hugely pro doing. Is like, look, giving people the credit they deserve alongside of the criticism. Like, we're easy to level the criticism, but like, can you level criticism at Lee and also praise McClellan? Like, that seems to be an exercise now.
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely what you have to do. That's what being a good historian is that you look at what they do well and what they don't do well. Right. And you're objective about it, and you tell people what the evidence tells you, rather than so many people that I see, they cherry pick the evidence that supports their case, and they discredit the evidence that doesn't support their case. And I'm like, you can't do that. You have to look at it all, and then you make an assessment on that. You may have a personal, I like this guy, but no, he doesn't do all that well, you know?
It's like cherry picking quotes. Very, very common.
Lincoln, that was one of my first educations on cherry picking, was just how the Lincoln quote on slavery gets so bastardized. It's like, wow, there's actually like 3 parts to that, not even 2.
Right, yes.
So like, it's just, that was a good example of it. So, we've had this grand fight on July 2nd. Sickles moved when he wasn't supposed to, all that, but Meade has done a brilliant job of spending the bulk of that day fixing this errors, moving people where they need to be. I'm a New York Giants fan, so I know a lot about luck. And what I've heard today is that the Union Army got some of that luck with everybody that needed to step up seemed to do that in the moments they needed to do that. I mean, other than Sickles, we haven't really talked about a Union Army officer sort of dropping the ball along the way here, at least in day 2. So that's a pretty neat sort of focus. Usually we get the bumbling Union Army. Right now we have this sort of juggernaut, people doing what they need to do. Kicking ass, taking names. The fight doesn't end though, right? The heights they remain in Union hands, but the Confederate Army has moved not off the field, but sort of back to get ready to do this one more time. So does everybody know? Okay, what time does July 2nd sort of peter out for the day? Like we were just talking about 4 or 5 o'clock in the evening. Barksdale's hit sometime around 6, 5, 6.
Yeah, about 6 o'clock. So the fighting on July 2nd doesn't end until after 10 o'clock.
All right, so way into dark.
Yeah, so
we're not
it's
going to cover all that.
the fighting. The Culp's Hill is where the last of the fighting is going to occur. So it's about 10 o'clock when the fighting concludes, and then both commanders have to decide, what am I going to do?
Like we haven't talked about him yet, but is that still Rufus Dawes over there doing the fighting on Culp's Hill? Like is that because
No, that's the 12th Corps. Now
Okay.
Dawes does do some fighting on the night of July the 2nd because the 6th Wisconsin comes down with some other 1st Corps units and reinforces the 12th Corps because the 12th Corps left except for one brigade. They left one brigade on Culp's Hill, Green's brigade.
George Sears Green. Yeah.
And they sent everybody else over to the left flank. And then Ewell decides that, hey, my orders gave me the discretion to launch an attack. Once again, he is assertive, he is aggressive, he makes the decision, he launches an attack. He attacks East Cemetery Hill and he attacks Culp's Hill. The East Cemetery Hill got up onto the hill, hand-to-hand fighting, I mean, real true bona fide hand-to-hand fighting. But they get repulsed. The Culp's Hill attack doesn't gain any ground except on what they call the lower hill of Culp's Hill, because there's no Union troops there. The Confederates capture the entrenchments at that point. And so that's going to lead to what Lee's going to do on the 3rd day. So Lee is able to learn from Ewell, hey, our attacks weren't successful, except, we gained some success on this one hill, or on my front. So Lee doesn't hold a meeting of his senior officers, which he did a lot of times just to kind of get the sense of what was going on. I think Lee's assessment was, I'm winning the battle. I've got 5,000 prisoners at this point. I've driven the Union Army from the field July 1. I drove their left flank back for nearly a mile July 2.
But they don't hold the high ground.
He doesn't, but they got a new commander. I've whipped them every time when things have got tough. We're going to win this battle. He's very confident. I think Lee thinks he's going to win the battle. And he's got a fresh division. Pickett's division has arrived near the battlefield. And he issues orders during the night. They're almost absolutely verbal orders, not written orders. And the orders are for Longstreet to attack at daylight on his front. He does not specify where. And then Ewell is to attack at the same time as Longstreet, when he hears Longstreet's guns, on his front. He does not specify where. Ewell makes the decision that he will attack at Culp's Hill. So he reinforces Johnson's division over there. That's where I'm going to attack because that's where I think the greatest hope of success is. And I'm going to attack. Actually, the attack was not when Longstreet's guns went off. It was attack at daylight. So everybody knows.
Yeah, because like at 7 o'clock in the morning, he's in the crowd.
Right. So 4:30 a.m. in the morning. Actually, they were already in.
They were already in it.
So he knows what he's going to do. He's going to reinforce Johnson. Daylight, he's going to attack. He knows Longstreet's going to attack also. Jeb Stuart has finally arrived. So we got Stuart on the scene. And Stuart's orders from Lee are to take the cavalry out beyond the left flank of the army and protect the flank of the army. But I think Stuart's orders and what Lee's mission for Stuart is a dual one. One, I want you to protect the flank of our army, but two, I'm putting you out there because you're in the ideal position to pursue when the enemy retreats. So you're the pursuit force.
He thinks they're going to break him.
He thinks they're going to win the battle. He thinks they're going to win the battle. So the plan starts to fall apart almost immediately. But before we get into that, the Union High Command all meets at around midnight at the Leicester Farm, Meade's headquarters. They have this long, rambling meeting that Meade apparently didn't want it to be a council of war. It kind of grew into one. And Butterfield drew up this list of questions as to what they were going to do. And the consensus was stay and fight it out, hold this position. So Meade had actually already written Halleck that's what he was going to do. So he was. That was his plan. These guys just confirmed that they agreed with that plan.
Stop crushing this narrative that he's indecisive.
Right.
God, Scott.
Yeah. So Meade's made this decision. He's going to defend his position. And a lot of times I would do this with visitors because they all think that the Union Army had the advantage in the battle. They had the high ground. They had the larger numbers. I said, okay, you're Meade. You've lost, almost 18,000 men so far in the battle, right? Where's Lee going to attack you? Where should you be strong? When you start to put people in their shoes, and then all of a sudden they're like, I don't like that situation. I don't know where I should be strong. I should probably be on the flanks. So, like, what if he attacks in the center? I'm like, you see the point that Meade doesn't have an advantage. He has a disadvantage. Lee has the initiative. He has the advantage. But Lee's advantage is going to be squandered because his senior corps commander does not play ball with him. So Longstreet is going to claim after the war, I never got any orders from Lee. I think that's hooey. I think he absolutely got orders. They were verbal, so he can claim he didn't get any orders, right? Because Ewell got orders.
Ewell knows what the plan is.
So if Ewell doesn't get orders, or Ewell does get orders and Longstreet doesn't get orders, that doesn't make any sense. So Longstreet claims I never got any orders. I had my scouts out all night, and we found a way around Big Round Top, and we've got a way to, but there's no plan, right? Pickett's not even ordered up onto the field yet. So when Lee rides over to Longstreet's lines at about 6 a.m. in the morning, nothing is ready. Longstreet's guys are in a defensive position, not offensive. They haven't even formed up to make any sort of attack. There's no preparations for an attack. Pickett's not on the field. Longstreet's coming up to Lee telling him, well, we found this way to get around their flank. Lee's already got a plan. I mean, he already had a plan. This is what I want you to do. And now he's got his senior corps commander telling them, we want to try and do this maneuver when I don't even have one of my divisions, which would have to lead this movement, on the field. I think Longstreet's just grasping at straws. He doesn't want to attack again. He doesn't want to attack.
Who in the Confederate Army does want to attack during this battle? Because it sounds like a lot today we've heard this person doesn't want to commit to this fight. This person doesn't want to commit.
AP Hill.
I think
he's not sick today.
I think AP Hill, he's ready to obey orders and fight, and Ewell is ready to obey orders and fight. And they're ready to obey orders. Longstreet, he kind of has this, we all look at Lee, everybody's kind of deferential to Lee because you're like, wow, he's Lee. You remember Lee of the whole war. I don't think Longstreet was that way. Longstreet was like, I'm Lee's equal.
Okay.
I'm his equal. So I don't defer to this guy.
My mind is just as good as his.
I'm just as good as him. Yeah. So he, and he also really doesn't want to attack there. Again, I think he feels, Lee's a strong-willed guy. But he's like, if I do this, maybe he'll give up, and maybe he'll maneuver us to another field. So he keeps reaching at these straws. So when Lee gets there, he's telling him about this plan. We'll go around the flank. I think Longstreet or Lee saw at a glance, like, this is a half-baked idea, and it has no chance of success. And by the way, Ewell's already engaged, and I've already given orders to Jeb Stuart to go into position. No, we're not doing that. Okay, so you tell me that the enemy is strong on McLaw's and Law's front, because Law's taken over Hood's division. We'll leave them in position. They can't be strong everywhere. We'll shift the focus of the attack farther north. We'll hit that open ridge, Cemetery Ridge, and I'll reinforce you from AP Hill's corps. So we'll mount a major attack. And then now Longstreet's like, wow, I don't like this plan either. And that's when Longstreet, asked Lee, how many men are you thinking of here? And Lee, I think Lee's just estimating what he's thinking of, about 15,000. And Longstreet argues, 15,000 men ever arrayed for battle can take that position. I think you need 30,000. And even then, he says, I think the issue would be in doubt. But again, what Lee's seeing is that you weren't at Chancellorsville. My artillery infantry coordination was superb. And we drove the Yankees out of entrenched positions at Chancellorsville. We can take that position. I know it looks really hard. But we're going to hit them with such a bombardment. We're going to knock them to pieces, and then you're going to have a lot of infantry, and you're going to take that position. So Lee's going to, over Longstreet's objections, Longstreet doesn't even want to command the attack. But he's Lee's best tactician, hands down.
I mean, I agree. I make this case all the time that people that are pro-Confederacy don't give credence or credit to the right general. Everybody worships the ground Jackson walks on. I mean, there's a reason he's the war horse. There's a reason this guy's in multiple theaters of the war.
Right.
I mean, like Longstreet's a fighter, and he knows what he's doing.
Yeah, he's a good soldier. I mean, he.
Oh, it's so hard for me to give Confederate generals credit.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, Longstreet is a good soldier, but he has. I mean, again, you have to be objective. He has his foibles.
Yeah.
And he is not a supportive commander to Lee in the Battle of Gettysburg, and he hurts the Confederates in this battle.
I'm just stuck on the chain of command issue. I imagine in your Park Service career that you managed people along the way, and like I managed people in life. Like, dude, you'd be fired if you were this insubordinate. Like, dude, do your job because I freaking ordered you to.
Yeah.
And like, you could just like, if we lived in this world where people could just interpret it, like I'm doing this with my kids. Like, no, like Dad said, you don't just get to I want this, but like. People are dying as a result of this sort of indecisiveness and I want this or I don't want that. And it's like, my mind is exploding just listening to this.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. But I think also is that you get to a high enough position, it's hard to get rid of you.
Sure.
Ask Joseph
So-
Joffre.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that Longstreet certainly knows is like, who are you going to replace me with? You got nobody.
It ain't Jackson, baby.
No, you're just not going to replace me. So, I mean, he can speak very frankly to Lee, and he can write all sorts of stuff after the war, much of which isn't true about what happened. I think there were orders. I think he didn't like his orders. They were verbal. He could claim that he was kind of interpreting them, and I'm trying to find a way to execute something that you want, and then he really gets in a pickle because now Lee wants him to make this big attack. And here's the story. Here's where it gets really interesting. Is Ewell writes in his after-action report that he received a message from Lee that Longstreet would not be ready till 10 a.m. That's really significant because when did the attack go forth?
Like early in the morning.
1 o'clock. The bombardment begins. Longstreet's bombardment begins 1 p.m.
I thought you were talking about like the wing action.
So Ewell's engaged. He's in a hell of a fight, right? He's in a hell of a fight.
Almost done.
And he's like,
He's getting close to being done, right?
Yeah.
So he gets this message, 10 a.m. Longstreet's
done by
going to
11 or something.
Longstreet's going to attack at 10 a.m. So at 10 a.m., General Johnson at Culp's Hill orders Daniel's brigade and Stewart's brigade to attack in their front, to mount an attack, a two-brigade attack. Both brigade commanders do something unprecedented in the Army of Northern Virginia. They protest the order. Wow. They've been fighting all morning. They're like,
grinding.
there isn't a chance this attack has any hope of success. And it goes all the way up to Corps headquarters, comes back, make the attack. So why is the orders coming back? Because Longstreet's going to attack at 10 a.m. and you need to keep the enemy occupied over here, right?
Yeah.
Right. Does Longstreet attack at 10 o'clock? No.
Nope.
The Confederate sources are silent about why it takes Longstreet nearly 6 hours, maybe 7 hours close, to prepare Pickett's charge. I don't know. Maybe there's completely legitimate reasons for it. But that thing always sticks with me. Like, Ewell thinks he's going to attack. Ewell orders this attack. That's his two brigade commanders protest it because he thinks Longstreet's going in, and Longstreet is not ready for 3 hours after that. And the Confederates say not a word about why there was any sort of a delay. Anyway, there's this huge delay.
Yeah, Ewell's hung out to dry, meanwhile, during this.
Ewell's hung out to dry. Eventually, Ewell withdraws. The fighting at Culp's Hill is over. Jeb Stuart, his cavalry in the afternoon is sighted by the Union cavalry. It's actually seen by the signal station on Cemetery Hill, which signals the Union cavalry east of Gettysburg. There's a big cavalry battle. It's indecisive, but it's decisive. And what I mean by that is nobody gains like an advantage on the battlefield, but Jeb Stuart is stymied. He's not going to do anything. All right, he's not going to threaten the Union rear or do anything at all. So they've removed him.
Pretty big historical name out there for the Federal Army. In the
George Armstrong Custer.
That's
is there.
right.
Yes, George Armstrong
You don't get to say
Custer.
that a lot in the Civil War.
And Custer does really well. I mean, he's really brave. His men love him. He's brand new to brigade command, and I mean, He does what they wanted him to do. He's a hard-hitting commander, and he inculcates in his brigade, nobody's as good as you. You're as good as anybody else. Hit them hard, and that's the way his guys fight. But I mean, the other part of it is where everybody makes a huge deal about the cavalry battle is the idea that Jeb Stuart was supposed to ride in the Union rear as Pickett struck the Union center. No plan to ever do that, ever.
You don't tell me what my lost cause tells me to tell me, believe.
Because the thing is, the other thing about it is, when Lee's original plan is made, there is no Pickett's charge. Longstreet's going to attack on his front. There's no Pickett's charge. So Pickett's charge is a second plan that Lee evolves because Longstreet's not ready to do anything. Stuart's orders never change. He's still out there, right? So Lee's gambling everything on this big attack. And the thing was, the bombardment and the attack were both actually well executed by the Confederates.
I can't believe they got across the field.
Right.
I mean, you'll always hear the cannonade, which lasted a really long time. It's almost 2 hours. Was a failure. It destroyed the 2nd Corps Artillery Brigade for the most part, except for Woodruff's battery, which is around Ziegler's Grove. All the other batteries are either knocked out of action or they're out of ammo. So it does its mission, which is to silence the Union cannon in the center. It doesn't do a lot of damage to the Union infantry, but it does neutralize the Union artillery there. And then the infantry movement is really well executed, moving across the field. The problem is that once the infantry comes into view, and because the bombardment took so long and they'd used so much ammunition, the artillery can't support the infantry. Federal artillery on the flanks, so down below the Pennsylvania Monument towards Little Round Top, Cemetery Hill, it all ceased fire to save their ammo.
Right.
So now they start mauling the Confederates with artillery fire. And that's going to create, what's that?
Oh, the Federal Artillery Reserve is also going to be able to be deployed too.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they've got a lot of guns firing, and they're really, really tearing up some of the Confederate brigades, particularly on the flanks. In fact, artillery fire is largely responsible for breaking Brockenbrau's brigade on the left of Pettigrew's division. But they get to the road, they get across the road, and once they get across the road, then the order starts to break down, and then you really have to close the distance with the enemy really fast. And the attack keeps shrinking and moving towards this central point, the angle, which was the most vulnerable point in the Union line. That's why the junction of the two wings of the attack were oriented there. There's all sorts of things that you'll hear. The people have all these cockamamie theories. Lee was actually attacking Cemetery Hill. No, Lee was attacking Ziegler's Grove. And I'm like, no, he wasn't. He was trying to break the Union line. And that was a vulnerable point in the Union line. You could see it. If you go to Peach Orchard and you look up there, you can see the angle's a vulnerable point. So you bring the junction of the attack to hit that. All the reserves are stacked towards the center, towards that point. You're going to break through. You knock a hole in the line, you open up the wedge, and then you roll up the line in either direction. They reach the line, they drive the Federals away from the angle, but they've lost so many men doing that, now they need the support line, Armistead's brigade, in Pickett's case, to exploit. And Armistead loses so many men getting up just to the front line. He does try to exploit. He goes over the wall with a crowd of his men who go with him, and
a couple hundred guys.
Yeah, at least. I mean, it was.
I mean, it takes like 200 to 300 guys.
There were two movements over the wall.
Okay.
There was the one with Armistead, and there was another one that went down towards the clump of trees.
Okay.
And that one is the one where the 69th Pennsylvania gets into hand-to-hand fighting with those guys.
I want to talk about them in a minute.
Yeah.
We'll
Okay.
talk about them in a minute.
So they. They get up and they go over the wall. There's guys from Armistead's brigade, Garnett's brigade, maybe even some guys from Fry's brigade. They go over the wall. But the thing is, I mean, on the Federal side, the Federals fight tough. I mean, they fight tough.
Absolutely.
And they've got some good commanders in the area. Alexander Webb, Norman Hall. These are really good commanders. These are all veteran troops. And then you get some of these troops, like the right wing of the 71st Pennsylvania, had 500 extra rifles. the 69th Pennsylvania, every man in the regiment had 2 to 12 rifles or muskets. Every man.
Wow.
So, because they'd gone out and gathered up
Picked 'em all
all
up.
the weapons the night before, on the night of July 2nd, and ammo. So they were armed to the teeth. They're
Well,
like,
screw
boy.
reloading. Just
Right,
pick
they're
up
like,
your weapon.
yeah, if the Rebs come back again tomorrow, we're going to be ready for them. And that's why the 69th is able to put out such heavy fire from their front, is because the guys have a lot of weapons with them. And so anyway, they, there's a lot of confusion and chaos. Armistead's moment of glory probably lasted a couple of minutes. I mean, because they brought the 72nd Pennsylvania up onto where Hancock Avenue runs
That's what I
today.
want to ask about.
And what Webb, who was the brigade commander, wanted to do is he wanted them to charge. And they got up there. They took a volley from the Confederates down at the wall that shot a quarter of the men in the regiment. So that was the end of any idea of a charge. So they just stood there loading and firing their weapons. So somebody probably in that regiment at the 71st hits Armistead. He topples down.
The volley cripples that, or do they actively refuse? Like, are they? Cause they are ordered in.
Yeah, they don't.
This is what I want to ask about.
They're not going to move. They're not going to move because they see the Rebs have got a strong position. They're behind this wall, and they just took a lot of casualties. Right? They take a lot of casualties. And Webb goes over to the color bearer, and he tries to get the color bearer to advance the colors. And the color bearer, Webb had only been in command of the brigade for a few days, and it's possible the color bearer never even paid any attention to who he was. So he didn't know who this guy is, really. So they get into a tug of war with the colors. And then Webb, he writes he was just disgusted with the regiment. He thought their performance was really bad. He leaves them and he goes running down to the 69th Pennsylvania. And then Frank Haskell comes riding up, and then he starts trying to crowd the regiment and get the regiment to go forward. Then the color bearer, he ended up getting riddled with bullets. He got shot like 11 times.
As flag bearers.
And somebody else picked up the flag. And by that point, resistance on the Confederate side was beginning to diminish. And then this whole mob of Federal troops, including the 72nd, starts to rush down towards the wall. So the thing is, you can criticize the 72nd, but unless you were there and you saw the circumstances that they're facing, maybe any regiment would have done what they did on those circumstances. I mean, when you took that sort of fire and that many losses, it may have been, whoa.
It staggered them, for sure. Absolutely.
We're just going to return fire here.
All right, so in plain, here's what I want to ask, right? So we have 3 units in this one area, 69th, 71st, 72nd.
Yeah.
69th is standing there just throwing smoke at the Confederates. Right, we got 8 million muskets per guy.
Yeah.
We're just throwing lead out there, right? 71st has been basically swallowed and smashed. I mean, they're smacked in the face, they're beaten. So we go to the 72nd, and they're ordered. We're not asked. We're not playing games here. I mean, this is a war. These are orders being given.
Yeah.
And I guess they start to move, they take this volley, and then suddenly they're like, F your orders. My brain is like, here's my question.
Yeah.
What are the consequences of that? Like, I get that you got scared, got blunted, but like, dude, we're in war, and you were ordered in. Like,
yeah. Well, ultimately, you can give all the orders you want, but if the men don't know you, they're not going to die for you, or they don't respect you. So they're not going to obey your orders. They're just going to hunker down. And I think in the case of Webb, either the situation was so frightening for them, what they saw, they didn't think it had a chance, or they didn't really know Webb or really have confidence in him yet, that are like, we're not following you into that.
right.
So no, we're not going there.
Right. There's
So
going to be a lot of controversy with the 72nd
Oh, yeah.
after the
The
war.
fires
Like
was.
where they should have their monument. and
Oh,
stuff
yeah,
like that.
yeah,
There's
yeah,
a
they-
whole fight
oh,
just
yeah.
about that.
Again,
was a huge-
Giants fan crapping on Philly things. I'm good with this. I mean, that's where this unit's from. They're from Philly. But no, I mean, in serious, every time I come across this part of the fighting, my brain is always stuck on the like, okay, what are the consequences of just defying orders? Like in a world I live in, if you just defy orders, you're getting in trouble.
yeah.
I mean, there's something.
No, they didn't really do anything to him. Webb complained about them immediately after the battle, but ultimately never did anything. He didn't do anything to the regiment, because I think his feeling was they took the most killed in action of any regiment in his brigade that day, partly because they were in a really exposed position. 69th was second. The 71st actually did well, the right wing of the regiment. They didn't bug out. The left wing of the regiment
Is what gets rolled in.
they were ordered by their commander to withdraw, and then they just kept going because I mean it looked bad, and they just kept going. But in other parts of the line, I mean, they were just pulling guys out of everywhere. The 1st Minnesota, the 20th Massachusetts, the 82nd New York, the 19th Maine, all these 7th Michigan, all these units are rushing up. Not everybody in the units, but large parts of them all are rushing up towards the clump of trees from the south. And
like company by company?
no, just if you could hear the orders or see the officers gesturing, go, go, go,
Everybody
go. Everybody go. So they ultimately get up there, and I mean, one of the best descriptions of this fight is Frank Haskell's. I mean, there's just a mob of guys up there, all trying to get in a shot at the Rebs. And ultimately, I mean, there's all these flanking attacks also, because there's Stannard's brigade has rolled up the right flank of Pickett's division, and then the 8th Ohio with part of Willard's brigade, or Sherrill's brigade, is rolling up the left flank of the Confederates. And Confederates are starting to realize, we got to get out of here.
Yeah, they're shredding them on the
So
flanks.
then there's just this general movement. I don't think any one person can take credit for it. It's this general movement that rushes down to the stone wall, and it's messy. I mean, there's accounts that I've seen where there's Confederates running at these guys with their hands raised, and then there's guys behind them still fighting. So this one Union soldier says we were obliged to shoot through the men who were trying to surrender to get the guys who weren't.
Yep.
So it's messy. It's
Well, this is
and
the
guys are
Fredericksburg part. This is the guys
and guys are picking up flags all over the place, and some of them get the Medal of Honor, some of them don't get the Medal of Honor. It just kind of depended on if somebody got your name and you had the flag. Most of the flags are just picked up off the ground. There's no like heroics associated with it. They're just laying there on the ground. The guy picks it up, comes back in, gives it to their colonel.
We're going to cover it in a different segment with another one of our friends, but a couple of flags are never picked up off the ground. In fact, they're just dragged behind a horse.
Yeah,
That's one of my favorite parts of the story.
Yeah, that was Alexander Hayes. He rides across in front of his division because they captured so many flags in his division's front that he said, give me some of those flags. So he took some of the flags, and then they ride across the front of the division. Everybody's cheering. Of course, some of the Union soldiers in Gibbon's division were shouting Fredericksburg at the Confederates.
Thank you for what I think you're about to say, because here's what I like. While they're shouting Fredericksburg, a lot of Hayes' guys are shouting a different place.
Oh, sorry, shouting Harper's Ferry.
Right, and that's we talk about. We never really focus. We glaze over this. Well, they're part of that huge surrender of U.S. forces. So those guys are like, screw you. Right? Yeah. So I thought that was interesting when I learned that. I was like, wow, like Harper's Ferry in '62 still showing up.
Yeah, and that brigade, Willard's brigade, took a huge number of casualties in the battle, and they were in a lot of fighting. I mean, they were in all this fighting against Barksdale in the second, and then they're in all this fighting repulsing Pickett's charge in the third. They did a really good job in the battle, but it's, I mean, it ends up, it's a debacle for Lee. I mean, I can understand why Lee thought this attack was going to work.
Yeah.
Where I think Lee, again, we talked about, kind of at the beginning of the podcast, that Lee sometimes could be guilty. His strength was imagining he could do the impossible. His weakness was imagining he could do the impossible. So he asked more of his men than they were really able to do. They'd done, it was amazing what they did. The thing that he underestimated was, did the Union Army make any changes after Chancellorsville? And they did. Their artillery was reorganized, so it was much more effective in the battle. Was the Union Army more motivated? They're fighting in Pennsylvania. They were. They were absolutely more motivated. Did Meade make some command decisions that maybe were better than his predecessors? He did. So the Union Army made a lot of changes that enabled them to fight the battle that they did and fight more effectively than they had in any other battle, except maybe Antietam, of the war. And the result was Lee gets whipped in the battle. He's defeated in the battle. And, again, you have the old audacity legend, and some of it's not a legend with Lee. Lee is an audacious commander, but Lee waits at Gettysburg on July the 4th all day because, he's just this audacious guy, and he's kind of daring Meade to attack him. But when you put yourself in Lee's shoes in a real situation that Lee's in, you have a huge number of wounded. Now you have to determine who can be evacuated and who can't. You have to organize the transportation for all of them. You have to get the transportation to where it needs to be at all these different field hospitals. You have to load the soldiers. That is going to take all day. So why does Lee say July the 4th? Because he's got to try and get as many of his wounded out of there as he can, and round up any stragglers, things like that. So he needs a day to at least do that. Then he's going to start to retreat. So the idea that Lee stays at Gettysburg because he's just this audacious guy, I think is not what the reality is. The reality is he stays at Gettysburg just like he stays at Antietam after September 17th for practical reasons. Because he's got a lot of wounded, and he's got a long way he's got to move them, and he has to determine who he can move. He's got to find where they are, get the wounded, get them loaded on the wagons, and then create the escorts for them, the timetable of the movements, the timetable for the withdrawal. It's a complex movement that Lee's going to try to undertake.
No, guys, just move the red block on the map. That's what we do. Scott, as we wind down, I just wanted to kind of touch on something, and I wanted to ask you a question. One, I refuse to call Pickett's charge Pickett's charge.
Okay.
Like, I just can't. Once I learn better, I just stop. I'm like, there were other guys involved. I mean, if I was Pettigrew or Trimble, I'd be pissed.
Yeah.
I'm like, my guys died just as hard as your guys died. So I try my best, and I challenge you out there listening. It's Longstreet's assault. I mean, if you want to give it to anybody, it's Lee. Lee's making this assault happen. Longstreet doesn't want to do it.
Right.
But Longstreet's really the corps commander in charge of it. So, like, there's more than Pickett on this field. So I wanted to say that. But the question I wanted to ask is just from people that studied this assault, this Longstreet's assault, 1 mile of open ground. This is a theme in questioning I have. I have it in 64 with John Bell Hood, especially Double Down. But, like, this charge seems silly from 30,000 feet, right? So much open ground. The Union artillery is well placed. It's thin. That's why the Confederate guys overshoot for the most part. And the Confederacy, one thing I was thinking of when you were talking about the effectiveness of Union artillery, I said there's some Confederate guy who talks about they thought they were just placed out there to be target practice for the Federals. So just show you how devastating their artillery was. But, like, this isn't the first time they've crossed open space like that and been chewed up the entire way. A.P. Hill knows firsthand how this goes. At Malvern Hill, they just did this. So my brain says, I guess it's a two-part question. In July of 1863, why did they allow this to happen when they saw this happen literally a year prior? Yeah. And then I guess hypothetically in 64, a guy like John Bell Hood, who I guess didn't physically see it because he's wounded and recovering, but has to know about it. Like, how do they keep repeating these open, especially in Franklin where it's 2 miles, but like, what is the purpose of this if they know it doesn't work? Why do they keep repeating these open charges? Just from your opinion.
Hood's a special case, I think. He's just like uber aggressive. Lee would say to that, he'd say, the difference between Malvern Hill and Gettysburg and Chancellorsville is night and day. Because the artillery at Malvern Hill is terribly organized. And batteries came up individually. We didn't have any coordination. Once we got the Chancellorsville, we got the battalion systems really really effective. We concentrate artillery fire. And what I've found at Chancellorsville is that I can drive the enemy from almost any position if I coordinate the bombardment with the infantry assault. So what he's seeing at Gettysburg is I'm just using a lot of guys, and my artillery is going to tear them up. And it's like guys I talk to who served in the Pacific. They'd be like, man, we'd see the naval gunfire hit the island, and you're like, nothing can live through that. Nothing can survive that. And then we come in, and something could survive it. So I think military officers often overestimate what their artillery can do against the enemy. So I think Lee is guilty of that. I mean, in hindsight, when I look at Gettysburg, I'm like, Lee made the mistake that many commanders in military history have made, which is, I want the knockout blow and I want it now. Yeah. I want it right here. And I'm going to get it or I'm going to get whipped. And he lost sight of, what is my strategy? To keep the war north of the Potomac River. Not going to do it here at Gettysburg. let's move. Let's shorten our supply line. Let's move back into Maryland. Union Army will follow us. Maybe we can find a battlefield down there that might work for us. But let's fight another day. Let's not continue to fight here. So it would be like if Grant, after the second day at the Wilderness, goes, no, we're going to win the battle right here, and we're just going to slam against them. He goes, no, I'm going to go somewhere else. I'm going to move down to Spotsylvania. So Grant always attempts to maneuver. And I think that is Lee's Achilles heel at Gettysburg. And, you know, we talked about Jeb Stuart and this hubris of whipping the Union Army, always being successful. There's some hubris in the Confederate Army. I mean, they're so successful. Lee is uber confident his men can do anything. I think that one statement, if he said it, which he probably did afterwards, I thought my men were invincible, is an admission that I thought my men can do anything. I believe in them. And they believed in him, and they tried. They tried to do anything. But
And to his credit, he does lay it at his own feet.
Yeah.
He says it's all my fault.
But as George Pickett, again, supposedly famously said about why the Confederates lost, I think the Yankees had something to do with it.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's, you know.
Yeah. All right, so let's do this because I want to thank you first and foremost for your time today. This has been incredible. I mean, like I have met some of my favorite guitar players of all time. I have met some of my favorite baseball players, and I honestly didn't really get nervous or any of that. Like, dude, I have been nervous, but so excited to have you sitting here. This was a dream I've had to talk Gettysburg and to do it in our studio in my house. This is a dream come true. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
If you would be so kind, we'd like to have you back because what I'd like to do is talk about like aftermath and memory. Of the battle. Sort of how I want to talk about maybe July, like 4, 5, 6, 7, maybe a few weeks, months later, because obviously the story of the battle goes on for months.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about sort of how we look at this battle in the modern day. Obviously, we've taken a lot of looks and shots through the movie and stuff, but like obviously this battle is critically important to our understanding, not just the war, but our country and everything. So I want to come back and talk about that. So can you come back, please?
Yeah,
Please, God, we're not that weird. Scott, thank you so very much for spending time with us here on the History Things podcast, buddy. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Well, Matty B, I can tell you we have had some Hall of Fame moments here on the History Things podcast, but I can tell you right away, I don't want to necessarily rank things out of respect to our other colleagues, friends, guests, whatever, but Mount Rushmore episode?
Most definitely.
Definitely
This one
Mount
was huge.
Rushmore.
Yes.
That was an incredible story to sit in this room and have a private history lesson, a private Gettysburg lesson from Scott Hartwig. Dude, we had a live Civil War Journal episode.
Yeah, we did.
You consider us as nerds and who we were as kids and like what that experience was. And here in the room where we do this show, we just got, I think that might be the best version of that story I think I've ever heard in my life, by the way. It appealed to all the things that I am as a storyteller. It was dramatic. It was very poignant. I mean, he hits that interp skill. I mean, he's mastered it, obviously. But even though he's retired and he talked about flipping the switch and it just being off, and well, that skill never goes away because that was quite a story. But he checked my humanism box.
Mm-hmm.
You know how we talk about people being people, but specifically, I just want to bring up the fact that I thoroughly enjoyed his real quick assessment on Caldwell. I think you guys probably just heard that somewhere around the audio glitch part of the episode, and I apologize for that. Not really sure what happened there, but it's probably right in the after that part. But he basically lays out the case that you can have good days and bad days, and I appreciated that because I have had good days in my life and I have had bad days in my life, and I have been spectacular in both of those columns. And specifically with talking about Caldwell, Matt, you and I, not that we're personally critical, but you and I live in a world where we see a ton of criticism heaped upon him because of his actions at Antietam.
Right. Or some would argue lack thereof.
Correct. But then you go to the next summer, 1863, and Scott makes the case that just as much as there's evidence that he, shits the bed at Antietam, the pendulum swinging the other way, there's just as much evidence to say that he has a very good day. And you can have both of those things. And I found that refreshing, considering weirdly we all live in this world where as he says as well, the evidence that you want is the evidence you want, and you will discredit the stuff that doesn't jive with it. But it's all evidence, right? You can have it. So I enjoyed that. Anything stick out to you aside from the just absolute majesty of the whole damn conversation?
Well, that for sure. But breaking down the immensity of this engagement, and Scott, of course, did the campaign for us. He did touch on the leading up to the fight itself, and then of course the 3 days of engagement and beyond, and hitting the fighting and basically laying out for us not only what has happened, but what is going to happen in the preceding days, which of course, folks, is what we're going to be touching on with our follow-up episode.
That's right. We have Scott joining us once again in a few short weeks. I think you guys will hear this about August 1st. But he's going to be talking about the memory of the battle immediately afterward, weeks, months, first couple years, and then how we view it today. What it means to us, how the battlefield came to life, monumentation, all that fun stuff. And he's not afraid to talk about some of the controversies attached to it, which I found was very refreshing as well. So when you download an episode that says the guest is Scott Hartwig, it's going to be everything you want it to be. This episode was everything we wanted it to be and then more. So I can tell you, as fans sitting in this room while it was getting recorded, we hope you enjoyed that. In fact, we know you enjoyed that. Again, sorry for my crappy microphone. Not really sure what happened there. By the way, heads up, it happens in the second episode too. I don't know what happened, man. As you heard at the beginning of this episode, the apology, the mea culpa of don't hate me for my bad microphone. Again, don't know what happened, but Scott was just brilliant, and I'm so excited. So, I still can't come down off the cloud enough to just compose myself to host the show, Matt. Like, how do we even go from here? Like, are we famous now?
By association.
Do we need a new championship belt that we, like, not only are we the tag team champions, are we now the world champions?
You've been claiming that since the beginning.
Have I? I forgot what we're the champions of. I guess it's just like Queen. We're champions of the world at this point. But anyway, guys, look, season 4, second half of it, the part 2 of season 4 is rolling with a huge bang. I mean, we came at you with Gettysburg for its 160, Vicksburg in a couple days. Watch out for that. And then in a few short weeks, we're going to follow all of that up, support it, meet you in the field, do tons of stuff. So make sure you are following us on all of our social media, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, just by searching for the History Things Podcast. Send us an email, historythingspodcast@gmail.com. Just straight up ask us what's going on. Matt's pretty on the emails. He'll reply kind of right away. You ever notice how on Facebook that they have a how fast you respond rate? Ours is pretty good. If Gmail did that, I bet you ours would say excellent, because you are so professional about responding.
Well, I try.
So you can get in touch with us through email. Follow us on all our social media to see what sort of stuff we're getting up to here as the summer heats up, both literally and here at the show. All right, brother, I just accidentally went into Hulk Hogan mode. I guess wrestling accidentally became a theme somewhere along the way. But we're very pumped. We're excited. We'll see you in the Steel Cage Monday night. But in reality, we'll see you in a couple days for Vicksburg and a few short weeks to start following all this up. For our guest today, the legendary, the one and only Scott Hartwig. I am Pat McGuire. This is my co-host, Matty Borders, saying we will catch you all later.
Have a good night.
You've been listening to the History Things Podcast. Follow the guys on Facebook and Instagram at the History Things Podcast for all the latest news and exclusives. Make sure to also follow Pat and Matt on their social medias at History Things with Pat and at Matt Borders Books. Have a question, comment, or compliment for the show? Send us an email at historythingspodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed the show.